Hello. Cheers, everybody. Happy Friday. We have officially had Bridgerton season 3. Oh, sorry. Technical difficulties. We've officially had Bridgerton season 3, part 1 for just over a week now. And as I promised during our read alongs of both Viscount and Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, we are here to casually discuss what we're feeling. I know that there have been a lot of feelings, and I respect all of those feelings. So we will get into it in kind of just a casual way. Additionally, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in to my video discussing thoughts on season 3. I know you have a lot of places you can get Bridgerton content at this point, so I very much appreciate you coming to me for any kind of content. Hello from Houston. Hello from Chicago, which, side note, we are finally starting to edge into summer here in Chicago. It's supposed to be a little cooler tonight than it's been the last couple of days, but if I start to sweat, it's because I had to close all the windows and turn off the fan so that hopefully it doesn't impact the audio. So just forgive me. We're all friends here. If you notice some sweat, that's what that is. I am not extremely nervous, at least at this point of the evening. It's just the heat. So how is everybody else feeling going into this, hopefully for you, long weekend? And what are we? This is, like I said, it's going to be very casual. So we have discussion places we can go, but I'm going to let the conversation kind of lead itself as well. I didn't introduce this in my video, I don't think, but for those of you who are a little bit newer to me, I do have a background as a dramaturg theatrically. And so that is kind of where some of my script analysis, literary analysis side of things comes, in addition to approaching it as a longtime book fan and as a reader. And I had a thought that went with that, but I've lost it already. So there we go. We're off to a grand start there. Yes, part 2. And I think that's going to be the big thing, because we have left off at, I guess that's just the introduction to me, and that's kind of how I'm kind of approaching things for those who are new. But yes, the part 2 and that shift and that split in the book is going to be a big piece of things, and I think a lot of the conversation as well. Hello, Amy. Hello, welcome back. But I had so many thoughts, and they are all just escaping me. As we discuss tonight, if things come up organically in conversation that you are interested in a more dedicated video on, I am kind of assessing where I want to go with that. I am, of course, very much interested in that, and very, very grateful that other people have expressed interest in that, but just trying to make sure that I talk about things that are actually of interest. And again, I, maybe I'm getting in my own head about it a little bit, just knowing how much content there is for everyone. So excited that you are finally catching a live as well, or you know what I mean. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm not going to lie. I got strangely nervous before I posted my part 1 analysis, partly because I am very much I could have talked for hours in the way that we probably will this evening, right? And still not talked about everything. And so I just kept thinking about all the things that hadn't been touched on that I knew people would want to talk about. But also, I don't know. I just got kind of nervous about it before it went up. So I was very, very grateful that everyone had such well thought out ideas. Whether, wherever you fell on the season, people just are very engaged with the content and the analysis, and that is just really great to see. Yes. The Featherington storyline about the heir. Yeah, I expected to be distracted by that, but I found it delightful. though I will admit that I am not great still at telling the Featherington sisters apart. So forgive me there. I will avoid referencing them directly by name because I cannot be sure I'm ever referring to the correct Featherington sister other than Penelope and, of course, Felicity, rest in peace, who does not exist in the TV show. In case you haven't read the books, no one actually passed away. I also have been rewatching a bunch of episodes today. I mean, there's only 4, so a bunch is a relative term. But currently I have, I think, episode 4 or the end of episode 3 on in the background. So if at some point my face just goes weird, it's because of the carriage scene. Yeah, this season was fascinating. It seemed like it was Featherington instead of Bridgerton for a moment. This arc so far is hilarious. Yes. I think that, well, no. Yes, actually. Sorry. I think that is of note because this is the first time we had Daphne, obviously, we have Anthony, obviously, but we really kind of shift. We saw a lot of the Sharmas in the second season, but it still really was focused on Bridgerton. But in romance novels, there is a framing kind of, what's the word I want? There is a tendency to really highlight the female heroine or female love interest's family or life as well. Obviously, we get the dual point of view, but in the books, we start in Penelope's head in the same way that in Benedict's book, we start in Sophie's head. So even though the Bridgertons are the framing device of the series, we do start to kind of fracture a little bit in terms of the focus of the storytelling there, even in the books. And I do think it's important to note, even as a fan of the books, that it's not going to be a beat for beat retelling, and it never probably was going to be a beat for beat retelling. So we have to take that into account at some point too in looking at things. And we can also, discuss what beats made it in and what beats didn't and what that does to the story and all of that. But that is a piece of it, I guess. Did anyone reread Emma because of the reference or just me? I have thought about it. I'm not going to lie to you. Let me pull this camera down a little bit, maybe. We'll see if that annoys me. Sorry to adjust in the moment. I'm not going to lie. Emma is my least favorite Jane Austen. So we have an Emma fan. We have many Emma fans. I do think it was a very apt reference. And yeah. I bet the sisters have girls and it's Penelope that has the boy. Yeah, I think that's the way it's going to go. I'm not going to lie. I don't love the Penelope pregnant hints that we're getting in this first part, or that she will become pregnant, but it's going to happen probably. Yeah, the idea of period romances in general, and periods outside of the Regency, absolutely. So just like romance, because I did a review today of a Victorian romance that came out this year, or that it's set in the Victorian era, which is also a pretty popular era for historical romance, admittedly. But we will talk at some point, probably, just I'm still marveling at how 4 years later, Bridgerton is still the biggest show right now and continues to pull numbers, and yet we haven't seen any adaptations of other romance series in a similar vein. And I talked about this briefly in my Bridgertonification of classics. I think it was of classics specifically that I framed it around video that I believe is in the Bridgerton playlist if you haven't caught that. Kind of looking at things like the Buccaneers and Persuasion, the most recent Persuasion that came out, and kind of how it seems like we're adapting classics with a more modern twist, which I don't think is wrong. And again, when you're redoing classics or when you're adapting classics, you have to have a concept of some kind. And it goes back to the kind of age-old theatrical question of why this play, why here, why now? So you do have to speak to modern audiences in a way. So I'm not begrudging that. That does make sense. But in some ways, I also think it is used to offer legitimacy to period romances, or there's some kind of judgment still against romance that's playing in to those decisions, if that thought is tracking for you as well. Yes. People love Bridgerton because real life sucks. And that is why we love romance as well. However, romance does still deal with a lot of, as we see in Bridgerton, even heavier themes. There has been a lot of discussion, and I do think I'm going to do a video on this. We will see, unless you're like, no, Melody, we're not interested in that, which fair. About the idea of the guaranteed happily ever after and the stakes of romance, and the happily ever after gets a lot of flack in that we know the ending. We know they're going to get together. So like, what's the point? But that is the point. It's all of the things that you can, and apologies, because I know many of you are romance readers, so I'm preaching to the choir, and I'm not meaning to talk down to you by any means. But it is that idea of what you can explore and what you can kind of mire yourself in emotionally. And there is also still that tension of whether the happily ever after or the happily for now is going to be emotionally satisfying. There is still a lot at play there, and it's actually really, really hard to pull off. In the same way that in a mystery, it's hard to pull off a successful reveal or a successful murder. So, not, you know what I mean? We're not actually murdering anyone in a murder mystery. I get the feeling the Winston Bros series is on hold. No one talks about it anymore. I wish there would be more romance series, whether historical or contemporary. Yeah, I got really bummed too because it's romance adjacent, but the Conductors and The Undertakers by Nicole Glover was a duology that is very underrated, that came out within the last 4 years. I forget when. The Conductors, I think 2020, I had videos on them. And it was optioned and nothing ever came of it. And the romance in that series is so good between Hetty and Benji. And there is like, anyway, this isn't about that, but you should read that if you are interested because they are great. So there is a lot to dig into here. I don't see Catherine here yet. And no pressure to Catherine, whether she is coming or not. But she is our keeper of the cursed time in terms of the Bridgerton timeline in relation to both Bridgerton and Queen Charlotte. And so I'm interested. If anyone else is able to track that, that is something that I am bad at keeping track of and is of interest. But other than that, we can kind of go where our whims will lead in terms of discussion, because I'm sure peer pressure. Yeah. Sorry. Colin just broke into a dance on screen. It's very dramatic, as you well know. That was loud. I wonder how Violet's storyline will go. Yes, me too. I'm not opposed to it per se. I know there's been a lot of discussion even within this circle about it. We talked about it pretty at length, I think, in our Romancing Mr. Bridgerton read-along video. And I don't know where it's going. Right now, I'm more interested in him in relation to bringing Gareth into the picture potentially. But I'm not opposed to it, but it's just the least interesting, I think, right now, because it's only been kind of planted. Nothing's come to fruition yet. Yes. Francesca and John are so sweet. I figured we'd get their blossoming romance in this book, in this season, and I'm enjoying it even more than I thought I would. I'm having a lot of big feelings about it. If you are a reader of the books, you know what that's in relation to. I'm going to try to be respectful of spoilers there, but I'm just really enjoying kind of seeing the mirror there. And again, we're going to use the word mirror and parallelism and reflection and all of that a lot this evening, I'm sure, and going forward when talking about the season. But it's just very interesting to see that. I also think because part one with Penelope and Colin is so still pulled back, and I know that there has been a lot of frustration from fans at not feeling like that connection is as genuine in part one. But to be fair, I don't think it can be. And I think it's a really delicate balance because these two characters they still have the mask on to whatever extent. And also, there isn't this full understanding of each other's feelings or even their own feelings for most of the book season so far. We've talked about this idea, or the cast has talked about this idea of these two having to get to know each other as they are rather than the idea that they built up of the other, which it could be argued that we could see some more screen time or some more conversations between them to help facilitate that, where there is a lot of the facade that's stripped away, but they're operating still within the constraints of society, and that is there. So it's a difficult balance, I think, and I haven't fully unpacked it. I think that I will at some point probably dig more into those beats because the more I rewatch, the more little moments I'm finding between Penelope and Colin that are forwarding a lot of those revelations within the characters that are pushing things along in that relationship. But again, it's in a really delicate place. And I do think it's interesting because like the pacing wise, now we have to cram a lot of it in at the end, but at the same time, that happened in the book too. Like we didn't really get, let me see here. We didn't really have, okay, so the end of episode 4 happens at page 215 in the book. Now granted, at this point in the book, we already know Penelope is Lady Whistledown. Like that revelation happens directly prior to the carriage scene, so the dynamics are completely different. But there is a lot then of space where they're getting to know each other, but at the same time, there is still this distance between them. From part 1, do you think there are any Easter eggs which hint at who the next season will be based on? So interesting to hear everyone's competing theories. Yes, if anyone wants to weigh in on this, please do. I don't like being wrong. I was very confident going into this season that Benedict was going to be next. I am less confident after part 1, but I don't know where I'm going to ultimately land based on part 2. We'll see. Hello. Sorry, I'm trying not to apologize so much. So I'm trying to read what everyone is saying because everyone has such great ideas, but I recognize that can be a little boring as a viewer. So I'm trying to balance this here. Okay, so Ashley says, for me, the most intriguing change from the book is that Colin knew about Penn being Lady Whistledown before he proposes. I agree. This is a major change. How I think this is going to play out pacing-wise based on the teaser for season or part 2 that I finally realized was after the last episode because someone in the comment section or multiple someones in the comment section clued me in because I got to the end of the carriage scene and I was like, great, what a joyful ride we just went on, and immediately either went back to the beginning or turned it off and went to bed. So I had completely missed that. And I would like to dive into that in more detail, but it's not on YouTube at this point. And I I don't want to say I'm a Luddite because Luddites get a bad rap historically in terms of the political context of them existing. But I don't know how to pull that video. So anyway, I think then based on that pacing, based on the kind of ultimatum it seems that Eloise has presented with Penelope with, which I think is out of care for her brother. And I would like to retract a comment I made in my analysis video because I think I intimated that Penelope was the only one who saw the true Colin. That is incorrect. Eloise also clocks him pretty early. And Penelope doesn't have the full true picture of him yet either, which is one of the conflicts of, I'm assuming, part 2. It's definitely of the book. So where I think that's going to go is the revelation leading up to the engagement ball, because there is the moment in the engagement ball in the book where the engagement ball is kind of ruined by Penelope bringing Lady Whistledown back when Colin had made the decision for her based on her not arguing with him anymore that she was going to hang up Lady Whistledown. And she cannot let Cressida, who, upon further reflection, I do think is still going to pretend to be Lady Whistledown for the money. I think that's been pretty well established in part 1 that the Cowpers need money. So I think that's going to be the climax for the engagement ball. How that's going to be paced, I'm not completely sure, because that surely will potentially fall earlier in the episodes. Like, I would anticipate that being in the first 2. I don't know if that's going to be like the episode 6 height. That feels like it might be delaying that a little bit. And I'm also kind of nervous to know if that is going to play, like in the book, directly into the mirror scene, because if that is the case, I really had hoped the mirror scene would be a very intimate, raw moment of like understanding and like seeing each other for who they truly are, which it could still be, but there might be more anger in the mix. So, the revelation, I feel like there's going to be some time to cool down. I don't know exactly how it's all going to play out there, but all of those pieces I think are definitely going to be in play. Feel free to weigh in. Yeah, it felt like the first half just went fast for Colin and Penn to me. Yeah, it feels like there are a lot of emotions there, and but again, they don't have the full picture of the other person, so the emotions aren't to the full height of them yet. But there are a lot of very subtle like looks and glances, and so it's still that kind of idea the other has of the other person, but they still see and appreciate the other person. I don't want to indicate or intimate, or whatever the word I'm actually looking for is, that they don't care for the other person. I kind of like Cressida's story. I wonder if her arc will continue into next season. Me too. I was actually shocked because notoriously or historically, I have liked Cressida as just kind of a flat villain. I do like a flat kind of external antagonist, which is something I didn't mention in my review today for the book I talked about. I did appreciate that there was like an outside antagonist. I don't mind a kind of mustachioed, like mustache twirling kind of villain if it's handled well. If there's like a slight level of camp, there are circumstances. But yeah, so I actually really enjoyed the nuance there, and the nuance in her relationship with Eloise, as I mentioned before as well. And I can, re-go into all of that, but I also don't want to rehash what I have talked about at length in another video either. Okay, so we've got some predictions here in terms of seasons. Benedict for 4, Eloise for 5, Francesca for 6, mainly on going on how things are playing out, and Easter eggs in season 2 with Paul Malsine and Ben's hand in closing his artist box. Okay, yeah, those are good theories, I think. I think potentially we could see Benedict and Eloise flipped, but that's the only kind of order that I am debating. At this point, I do think that that is essentially what we're going to see. I think Eloise will be lonely because her best friend married her brother and all of her other siblings are getting married. Yes. And that loneliness could then push her into certain pen pal relationships. I don't know. I don't know how they're going to handle that in the show, to be fair. And there was a moment in the show that I picked up on this most recent rewatch that I don't think I had fully unpacked previously in relation to the book. Obviously, in the book, Penelope and Eloise are not at odds. Eloise does not know Penelope is Lady Whistledown. And so they kind of are exploring the dynamic of watching your best friend get married and how that changes the relationship, and watching your best friend get married when you assumed you were going to be spinsters together. And so Eloise does have that line where she says, "Oh, I thought we were going to be spinsters together." But also that then reveals another little piece too, in that being a spinster has never been the true desire of Penelope's heart. So even though that friendship is strong, Eloise is still kind of projecting what she desired from the future onto that friendship. So I think that there are some really fun layers there. But again, I do like how that's handled in the book, the realities of how friendships change through just life circumstances. And while it's a happy moment, it is still an undeniable adjustment. I don't know how I feel about the twist yet. Colin's voice came from his journals if comparing to the book. I was a little jarred by his voice starting, and we know that the contents of that journal are very different from in the book. I I'm playing with the idea of whether there's going to be some like group project endeavor between the two of them in terms of writing at some point in the happily ever after because of those changes. But I also was not personally prepared for the voice, especially because it was so early in the season, so I wasn't ready for like the attempts at a sexy voice. Okay, Catherine's here. Catherine, if you have anything about the cursed time, please drop it in the chat. Christy says, "Do you think there will be a Lady Whistledown reveal, or will she just keep going?" That is an excellent question, because I think there has been some speculation. Again, I don't want to say it every dang time, but I try not to spend too much time in fan spaces, so I still have my own ideas, but things do obviously seep through. So I think I have seen some speculation that there will be revelations to like only certain parties, which I could see happening rather than the entire ton, especially if they do the like I am Lady Whistledown kind of step forward thing. That could be enough plausible deniability potentially to still use it as a framing device, but I don't know. In the books, you can move away from that a little differently than in the show when that has kind of set everything up. Additionally, I noticed some more kind of stuff with the Lady Whistledown voiceovers in this last rewatch, because obviously it is used to kind of set up the theme or the idea of that particular episode. But the episode, was it 2? I think it was 2, where Penelope or Lady Whistledown is writing about the spinsters who have gotten married and kind of putting that out into the world. Yes, there's no denying, I don't think, that Lady Whistledown is 1000, as you say, 1000% getting revealed at minimum to Colin, um, for sure. That's undeniable, and I don't think anyone would question that one, especially as there has been discussion, I believe, of Luke having scenes where he's angry, and that's going to be interesting because book readers know that Colin's anger plays very centrally into him as a character, and we've not seen that. We've seen a brief flash of that during the journal scene in part one, but not completely yet, which, to be fair, we hadn't in the book either. I thought the first part was well paced, and Penn and Colin have known each other a long time and have corresponded every time Colin has traveled. Thank you for bringing this up because this is something I didn't talk about enough. Everyone has such great comments, and I'm not keeping up well. So thank you. I've lost my spot already. Um, but the idea of this correspondence and that teaser scene that we got, which we have talked about a decent amount, but I am really struck by one, the fact that Colin comes in and is straight up flirting with Penn. And we've just seen him coming from a scenario in which that is very successful for him. So he is thrown by it not being successful in that moment, but also the complete sincerity of him missing his friend and having this correspondent, and also the possibility, because we see him very much adrift in the first part of this season. I don't think it can be overstated that he is very lost, and that sense of being a people pleaser that really comes into focus at the end of the arc of the first half. But he says, what does he say? I have it written down. About her, and I mentioned this in my other video as well, that she's the one person who truly makes me feel appreciated. And then I have what a stupid, and I'm going to censor myself because I don't know what we can say in terms of YouTube at this point, but I got very free with my stream of consciousness thoughts, at least for the first episode, because there is that emotional block, right? He's not even considering, and I came to the conclusion after multiple rewatches that Colin doesn't know that Penelope is in love with him. That thought's never crossed his mind, I don't think. I could be wrong. I will need to like rewatch the beats, but he misses his friend, and he's thrown off by this person that he considers a confidant not responding, and so he feels some tension or like that something is wrong there, because spoiler alert, it is. And as a people pleaser, he doesn't know what to do with that, and that is why he makes the bargain in the first place, because he wants to smooth things over, he wants to fix things. And I had another thought that was coming with the rest of this. It was a good one. At least I thought it was. I'm not going to force it. But I think that he viewed Penelope in that moment as someone to be rescued in whatever way. And we've seen a history of him feeling some level of satisfaction isn't the right word, but feeling like he needs to be the one to rescue, and that gives him some sense of purpose, if that makes sense. As we have more time for Francesca's story to play out, do we think we'll see Michael this season, or will that be in a future season? Which also harkens back to, I think someone else had a comment here that there has been some speculation in terms of the Michael storyline. I have not seen enough of that, and I don't think we've seen enough of it play out on screen to know exactly what's going to happen there. I am very interested in whatever choice gets made there, and we will see. I don't want to say no, they won't appear, or he won't, or whoever won't appear by the end of the season, but I also don't know. They have surprised me before. I would much rather see Sophie make a surprise entrance and kind of like let that breathe a little bit more, but you never know. Oh, will the queen start clapping for the reveal like Lady Danbury in the book? Maybe. The queen surprises us quite a lot, so I will be very interested. That could be enough of a moment to impress her, to dazzle her. And we've seen her take note of Penelope. So there is that awareness on whatever level. And she very much has this really, she, I think, finds purpose in her rivalry with Lady Whistledown. So I don't know that she is interested in the complete demise of Lady Whistledown. I didn't really enjoy the moment of her and Brimsley, or that they shared in relation to kind of like the game of Lady Whistledown in part one. I thought that that was really a nice little moment. Is the journal in the show straight up fanfic? I heard it might be. I had not heard that. Granted, I'm not in the spaces where I probably would. I I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised, but at the same time, I don't think it would be for copyright reasons, because that could put fanfic in danger. And I honestly think that the production has too much respect for fanfic to potentially put fanfic in danger. But generally, it is interesting because they have acknowledged, I'm pretty sure I've heard Nicholas say on tour, on the press tour, that they do read fanfic, which is different because they're not the writers. So generally, authors will never read fanfic of their own works or acknowledge fanfic of their own works, because then if a plot point from a fanfic ends up in their work, it opens up a whole can of worms. Yeah. Okay. So I know there's been a lot of contentiousness with the, okay, so let me read this comment. I get what they were trying to do with Colin's facade as a rake of the ton, but felt it needed to develop more. I think this is fair. I know that this is a very divisive storyline, and I'm not going to diminish anyone's feelings in regards to how it is playing out. I personally, at the moment, don't have any issues with it, despite the fact that it is giving me secondhand embarrassment, similarly to Penelope, which I think is the point. So they are both kind of trying to move in society in the way that they feel society expects them to move. Though not really with Penelope. She's trying to succeed at society in whatever way. I'm still developing my thoughts fully there, but I agree that we could have seen more from Colin, and I think I'm going to do a video potentially about some of those beats between Colin and Penelope and the struggle with kind of those internal moments in translating to the screen, because we get the internal dialogue of these characters in the book. And in fact, I remembered I had a whole section from the book about Colin's kind of revelations and thought processes from around page 100. So pretty significantly into the book, marked in terms of he is not in love with Penelope right away. And it's hard because I do want to see him courting Penelope. I want Penelope to get her moment and to get love in the way that she desires it, especially because personally, I just relate to Penelope. And I think that there is something incredibly relatable in a Wallflower storyline generally as well. So I'm not pretending I'm the only one that does or will. But that being said, if you will indulge me for a second, let me read this bit from the book from Colin's point of view. It says, and to top it off, he suspected that he might have done irreparable harm to his friendship with Penelope, which made him feel worst of all, since A, he rather valued his friendship with Penelope, and B, he hadn't realized how much he valued his friendship with Penelope, which C, made him feel slightly panicked. Penelope was a constant in his life, his sister's friend, the one who was always at the fringe of the party, nearby, but not truly a part of things. But the world seemed to be shifting. He'd only been back in England for a fortnight, but already Penelope had changed. Or maybe he'd changed, or maybe she hadn't changed, but the way he saw her had changed. Which I think is probably the central thesis of Colin's entire arc in part one, which is, I think, spurred on, his realization is spurred on by the kiss, but he is acutely aware of her at every moment in the ballroom in that first episode. Do, do, do. me catch back up here. Thank you all for having such great thoughts and being so engaged in the discussion. So we have so much to talk about. If you haven't liked, do that, I guess. I hate asking, but here's a good thought. I was wondering if they will significantly change Eloise's story. I have been wondering this since season one, in the sense that the minute they introduced Marina, I hoped we were going to have to contend with that in some way. And I'm not prepared to fully unpack that tonight, I don't think. But we're going to have to deal with that in some way. And I'm that is the plot point I'm the most nervous about. That being said, I think that there is a lot that could be changed about Eloise's storyline, especially because she basically enters a book with two precocious children. Children in that way in romance either really, really work or really, really don't. And we have to think about it in context of Eloise, though we are also setting up the idea of jarring her so much outside of her kind of worldview and what she thinks she desires of the world or how she sees the world. And I think that there's something potentially very interesting in completely kind of forcing her to look at things from a different perspective. And she can want whatever she wants. She can find her happily ever after, however she does. But I think that that is interesting dramatic action. Oh, this is a good point. Also hoping we at some point see that Colin kept all of Pen's letters to him and Colin picked up her emerald green hair clip and it's stored with the letters. I think the idea of him keeping the letters would be an excellent detail, especially if we do dive more into the writing in part two. It does, yeah, it's interesting because we didn't really have as much of that in part one. We got the references, we have the seeds planted, but it feels like there's so much to tackle in part two. And part of what I was so excited about with this division was being able to rectify some of those pacing issues from the book. And I think we did in a lot of ways because we made part one a lot more active in terms of goals of the characters and those stakes and things to act and act upon within those scenes from like a logistical acting point of view. But there is still a lot of ground to cover. Ashley says, I feel like I am one of the few in these circles who don't mind Colin's escapades at certain establishments. Seemed quite on par with many of the things we have seen in the show before. You are not alone, because I have a friend who immediately texted me actually very much enjoying that development, even knowing that others wouldn't. So I think it's meant to show, and again, I'm not begrudging anyone who doesn't like it. I understand why it's hard, but I think it's going to show the difference in attention with Penelope. And it's also showing kind of how he's kind of just going through the motions, and he's kind of like smarmy even in those moments. I did appreciate another thing I registered today that I hadn't before is that he does have chest hair, which sounds silly, but you can kind of tell the era of a romance novel based on how men's chests are described. That's, I guess, all of the thought I have there. Yeah. And yeah, I know a lot of people didn't like it. Fair. Fair. Yeah. I have known too many guys like Colin in real life. I 100% believe he was completely too caught up in his own issues to have even begun to realize how Penn felt for him. And I think this is the hard part, right? Because selfishly, I want to see Penn's wildest dreams come true, right? But Colin has to have a believable arc for himself as well. And so he can't just move about the world in fulfillment of Penelope's desires. He has to have his own character objectives. And they are often frustrating and can give the ick. but he is trying to fit in society. Now, it is hard because I do want to see those moments and I want to see him fight for Penelope. I also selfishly, not selfishly, it's not selfish, oddly, do want to see them fight. I want to see them hash it out. I want to see them verbally sparring like they do in the carriage in the book, which the carriage scene is so good. But in the book, we get there, the how we get there is so different. And in the show, it's kind of this realization of these unspoken fantasies from both sides. But we're still in the fantasy. And in the book, it's driven by the passion of this disagreement. So a lot of that action, even in a storyline that is not enemies to lovers, gets driven by conflict in that way. And I recognize I'm talking with my hands quite a lot. This is a great point. I think Colin's raking is meant to directly juxtapose how he was supposed to be on a journey of self-discovery, but he hasn't actually discovered anything. Especially because like he hasn't his travels seem very different in the show than in the book. Granted, he went to Greece last season, which is where he spends a lot of his time in the book. And we still get those nods from Penelope to like dressing like the latest fashions in Paris, which in a romance like is already kind of the norm because Paris is supposed to be the most fashionable place. So that isn't going to set off any red flags necessarily to anyone she's requesting that of. But in the book, she's reading up on Greece. So all of those things. You are not alone in seeing Cressida and Eloise, Catherine, but I don't think anything's going to come of it. But I am willing to be wrong. Ashley says, honestly, of all the books, Eloise's feels the most removed from what the show is and is doing. I'm having a hard time seeing that come to fruition in the same way. Yeah, I also am struggling to see how that is going to fit into the larger world of the show so far as we know it. Now, granted, they could expand past the bounds, which they surely will at some point if we are going to tackle all 8 siblings. But yeah, it'll be interesting. That I'm not going to be opposed to changes in that story. Ultimately, I don't think. I think if we see a lot of the same emotional kind of revelations, but I don't know that I'm going to be as tied to that source material in terms of forcing it into the shape. I don't know. There was a thought there. Jen says, love your comments, Catherine. Catherine always has the good jokes. Also, I was referencing the curse time earlier, just because aren't you our keeper of the curse time? And I didn't remember if there was anything in relation to the timeline in this season that is particularly cursed so far. Ashley says, I did find what Colin wrote in the show intriguing. He was talking about how even while feeling such physical intimacy, he was devoid of emotional intimacy and the distance he felt. That is my ding, ding, ding motion. Yeah. We need or are looking at the emotional intimacy, and that is what comes with the true happily ever after, is the emotional intimacy. And the physical intimacy or realization thereof, particularly in relation to the mirror scene, is going to be tied directly in some way to that emotional intimacy. It's just a matter of what emotional state we are in at the moment it happens. I know what emotional state I want us to be in, but I don't necessarily know if that is the emotional state that serves the story best. And that is one of the things that I have to kind of like attack. And I'm sorry if I'm just like intellectualizing it too much, but from a place where it just sounds pretentious. That's not my intent at all. But I'm trying to approach it from 2 standpoints, right? Like as a fan, as someone that can squeal over whatever, but also recognizing the storytelling realities and the kind of dramaturgical brain. I would kill to dive into these scripts because I want to see the action. I want to see the stage directions. I know that's not what it's called in a screenplay, but I want to see those moments because that is the closest we get to the internal revelations to know what's going on in these characters' heads. Otherwise, it is figuring out what objectives the actors are bringing to the table and how they are playing a scene. There's a lot there, I know. I took an acting 1 class, even an acting 2 class. So, not to. Yes, the Sir Philip in season 1 is, in theory, yes, canonically, it's the same Philip into Sir Philip with love, which is why we're kind of trying to assess what that storyline is and is going to do. And I know I'm kind of like jumping around thematically here as I go on tangents and then catch up with the chat. But again, you all have such great thoughts and ideas. I don't want to just skim over too much, but some things will unfortunately be skimmed over. Yes. Doesn't Benedict's book have straight up captive abuse themes? Captive? No. He wouldn't be opposed to forcing her into being his mistress, though. He keeps Sophie as a maid. He puts her in the household and tries to pressure her into being his mistress when she has said that she doesn't want to be. I do have a video ranting at book Bridgerton after I reread it last time. I anticipate them changing that, or have anticipated them changing that. I hope they do change that because I really, really love Sophie. I love Sophie. And I still love that book because it is a Cinderella story at its heart. And when I was a teenager, I want to say that book was this book. I know I say, that book used to be my favorite, or that book is my favorite now. All of them have joys. But I want to say when I was a teenager, this book and An Offer from a Gentleman. Also, like, An Offer from a Gentleman, when we know what the offer is. I'm not going to start because I do like Benedict and I like show Benedict. Do I know what's going on with him this season where he's hanging out with a Sarah McLean, Joanna Shoup character? No, I don't. But yes, there are things that need updating in these books. There are things that needed updating in season 1. But again, we're not going to travel that road. Yes, I feel it is essential to have a scene with Colin and Penn arguing. It'll show more of how they were written in books and help move along their development as a couple and as individual growth. Exactly. It's going to move them. And we need to kind of put everything on the table. We need to strip everything back and we need to look at what the realities are. And we get so close in that moment. And it's part of the reason I love that confrontation after the transformation ball so much, especially after we got the context, because it's where we see Penn being the most honest. She's like, I'm a spinster. What else would you call it? And I want to see the fervor that we have in the carriage scene in the book in the show, because Penelope has a lot of choices she's made as Lady Whistledown that are going to anger Colin because the stakes are higher from those choices in the show than they ever were in the book. In the book, Lady Whistledown never wrote a bad word about Colin. She never ruined his sister. Marina was a side character that only appeared referenced in Eloise's book. So those stakes were not the same. And so we know as an audience what choices of perceived protection Penelope made those choices out of. Did that sentence make sense? Anyway, we know why those choices were made. Colin doesn't. And so there's a lot more tension there, even than in the book. And the book was pretty tense, but it was more related to Colin's inner insecurity. And I think we're still going to play with that idea of insecurity because we've seen the insecurity personified in this idea of being a people pleaser. And we see that throughout the season, like with the gifts that Colin brings back. Side note, my favorite just like random moment from the season, and please let me know your favorite like random just throwaway moment, is Anthony taking the bow and arrows and like scurrying out of the room with Gregory. It's just so gleeful, and like just seeing him be so happy, and like that family moment. It's very reminiscent of the end of season 2 when they're dancing. It's just, I love that moment. Also with the activities Colin gets up to. And I'm not trying to be euphemistic. I just don't know what I'm allowed to say. Um, it doesn't look particularly like tantalizing, or exciting. It's just like it feels very rote and going through the motions. It's like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do, He looks so pleased with himself. And it's like they're asking because you're giving them money, my dude. Yes. One thing I really appreciated was Violet's speech to Colin to light that fire under his butt to go get Penelope before it was too late. It made me tear up. I love anytime Violet interacts with her children. And while I make jokes, and will probably continue to make jokes, that Violet was so distracted by Francesca that she misses like what is staring her right in the face in terms of Colin this season, she is so set on seeing her children happy, and like you see the conflict in her in relation to Francesca, and like her fear that Francesca is moving too quickly just out of ease, and that she's going to miss her happily ever after, and so that's why her focus is there. It's just that I love Violet. I love Violet, and I love that they are letting Violet shine in this show. I mean, she shines in the book as well, or the books as well, but it's just really lovely, especially because we're not going to have the conversations between Colin and Daphne that happen in the book for obvious reasons, and so it makes sense narratively for those conversations to be with Violet anyway. And I also think we're seeing that function transfer over to Eloise in terms of Eloise looking out for Colin and that closeness there, their ability to see each other. Colin is very, very discombobulated and uncomfortable with the idea of Penelope and Eloise being at odds and not knowing why. And you can see that urge to want to dig in there, but knowing it's more nuanced. And I really appreciate how it looks at the nuance of female friendships in this season. It surprised me because we knew there was going to be conflict there, and I was dreading it, but I think it's handling it in a really realistic way where they're both trying to be mature but recognize that there is a hurt and an obstacle there. I'm on a tangent again. Weigh in below. Okay, we got a thought here. What I foresee for part 2 is a really satisfying argument slash coming together between Penn and Colin, which culminates into the mirror, possibly post-wedding scene. I would agree with that. And I'm very interested to see in how all of that actually plays out. In terms of the wedding, let's talk about this for a second, because there was a lot of like disappointment in the fandom last season in not getting to see Anthony and Kate's wedding, which, I want that desk scene so bad. We did get teapot scene energy though, so at least we got that. Anyway, Colin and Penelope don't have a big wedding in the book. They opt to like get a special license and rush things along. So how do we think that that's going to play out in the show? Like, are we going to play with this idea of Penelope wanting the big wedding, wanting that big moment, and the revelation of Lady Whistledown and the discord between her and Colin from that kind of robbing her of that? Because they move into their marriage with this kind of hanging over their heads because of the engagement ball too. So there's a lot. There's a lot. I'm waving from Australia. Thank you for checking in, even if a bit late. Catherine says, I did a string board this timeline. It's impossible. You crack me up. Okay, thank you. This is self-indulgent. Indulge me for a second. I like you intellectualizing the story. It gives an interesting perspective on story beats. Okay, great. And I'm not always going to be right. One thing I love about these discussions is how smart everybody is. Colin gives, I went to Greece. I forgot how we do it here in England. Yeah, he had a semester abroad. Yeah, it's very much his like grand tour. And all of these gentlemen that want to hear about his travels. And I'm like, did you guys not go on your grand tour? Are you too poor to go on your grand tour? What's the tea? Maybe Lady Whistledown needs to talk about that. Thank you, Ashley. I really appreciate you being here consistently as well as all of the regulars and new people. I really, really appreciate it. All right, I permission to be pretentious. Pretentious but humble. How about that? Y'all gonna have to explain why people are shipping Eloise and Cressida. The most I feel they hinted was that Benedict could be fluid since he is the most progressive on the sexual front. I said that. I don't know if I'm allowed to, but I don't care. Whatever. I think that anytime there's a deep relationship between two characters anymore, that's going to come into the picture. Like anytime there's any like tension or potential. When I was in theater school, I recognize how that sounds, but you just gave me permission to be pretentious. I took a directing one class. Again, I was not an actor. I was not a director, but I needed to be aware of the whole spectrum, right? I'm in rehearsals or have been in rehearsals in the past. Haven't been in a rehearsal room for a second. But we talked about the idea that anytime you had a man and a woman on stage, there was going to be this assumption from the audience or this calculation from the audience about whether these two characters were going to get together. And in the decade, slightly over a decade since I graduated from college, I feel like that has only widened to anytime there are any two characters on stage or screen together, the audience is going to be calculating whether they're going to get together. But maybe I've just been in shipping spaces for too long. Oh. Maybe both Benedict and Eloise's story could be next season. Maybe, but I feel like that would cause some emotions and people would be upset that they're not getting their spotlights. Catherine says, I'm thinking Sophie is going to be resistant to Benedict in the show because she thinks he is a fair weather. That could be why they've had such, excuse me, I have the hiccups here. That wasn't the hiccups. That could be why they're having kind of these plotline. Benedict's plotline, like I said, is the one I can't make sense of yet this season, but I am really open to the idea. I like Sophie pushing back against him in the book, and I think they're opening up more there. We haven't seen him as an artist this season at all. Granted, we have established it, and in the book, we barely established it. Like, it was all of a sudden, it was like, Benedict's an artist, and Sophie was the most supportive of that. Probably because his family didn't know he was an artist because we'd never talked about it. Okay, while we're here, yeah, can we talk about Benedict this season for a split second? I love Luke T, but I have honestly felt like even some of his performance has been phoned in this season, just me. I don't think they are giving him much to work with. I remember I'm very confused because I remember in the February preview, it talked about him being left behind when Anthony extends his honeymoon and having to kind of take over the responsibilities of being head of the household in whatever way, which makes sense in terms of his arc in his book, establishing that he's really pushing back against this idea of always being number two. So in the book, obviously, or in the books, we have it flip-flopped. So Benedict is first and then Colin, but they're both having their own kind of identity crisis about not being the head of the household and what their function really is. And so I was anticipating really diving into that in this first half. And instead, he's just kind of bopping around. So maybe we'll get it more in the second, but I think Anthony's coming back to realize that he left and everything kind of went to poo for a little bit. So I don't know. I want to hear other people's thoughts on that. I also think it's important in relation to Cressida, showing the realities of what not succeeding on the marriage mart means. And I know I mentioned the first in the Wallflower series in my analysis video. And if you haven't, I know some of us have read the Wallflower series, which would also make wonderful television. But in the first book in that series, which also has a love interest named Simon, the lead is facing kind of her last gasp on the marriage mart, and there are a bunch of men kind of circling wanting to make her their mistress. So obviously much different stakes than Cressida, but looking at like the realities there and again reinforcing the support Eloise has from her family, and it's juxtaposing and mirroring Penelope's pressures of being at the whims of her sisters and her mother for the rest of her life. I can see the carriage scene out of the corner of my eye, just so everyone knows. Call back to yes, Anthony being brother, big brother. Let's do dangerous stuff outside. Yeah, I just love that moment so much. It's like not where our mother can see, just like darting outside. The maid side eye, yes. We see more of that downstairs kind of awareness, I feel like this season, which may also be prepping us for Sophie, because Sophie is going to give us more of a entry into the downstairs, which I think is going to be really fun to see how they handle that or explore that. But similar to in has anyone watched Mr. Malcolm's List and just seeing the servants kind of just like judging on the side? It's always a really nice touch that I really like in that movie. Oh, I missed that, Ashley. Um, I love that moment with all the gifts slash manly too. I've watched this so many times because Gregory actually points the arrow at Colin's heart. Really subtle hint at the Eros Cupid Psyche themes this season. Yes. And someone had an excellent comment. I know I touched on the Cupid and Psyche idea that Cressida raises in part one in my analysis video. And someone, I forget who in the comment section, so please feel free to go back and look at that, had a really, really nice breakdown of what that looks like for this arc and that breakdown. And so I'm really, really excited about that as someone who really loves Cupid and Psyche myth offshoots, of which include Beauty and the Beast and East of the Sun, West of the Moon, which is one of my personal favorites, even if I don't love the trials and quests of it because I don't love the Discord, but I unfortunately know that the trials and quests and Discord are coming. Violet's face when Colin was asking for advice is, yay, Penelope is going to be my daughter-in-law. Yeah. And the fact that he asks, how do you know? I think is very telling. He doesn't know. But also that, again, mirror between Violet and Edmund. I really like that they're leaning into the mirrors this season because it's so smart, because it's such a fan service moment and it's such a smart framing device, way to thematically link everything. It allows for analysis. It's smart storytelling. It's just so good, and I hope it pays off in the way that I think it's going to. Okay, somebody else picked up on the Gregory pointing at Colin's heart. I also love Colin, like, nonchalantly after his dream about Penelope in season 3 being like, yeah, I totally had such a wonderful night's sleep. I don't know what you could be talking about. And that beat was interesting to me because Benedict like immediately folds down his paper and you see that clocking, like he knows something's up, but he doesn't follow up on it in the way that I anticipated. Like the okay, just the tone of that wasn't quite what I was anticipating. I don't know. I'm probably getting too picky there. Yeah, exactly. That's the vibe. How'd you sleep? I definitely did not dream about Penelope. I don't know what you're talking about, but that definitely did not happen. Catherine says, I'm thinking the epilogue is either them publishing his book or her novel. This is where I think I'm wondering if I'm going to marry the two, because she's talked about wanting to write a romance, and we know in the book she does. And he has some of the other side of similar narratives in his writing. is why I'm thinking maybe that's going to be a joint effort, but don't quote me on anything I could be wrong on. Yeah, okay, we haven't talked about Lord Devling at all. This is why there's so much to talk about. But we're also, for us, we're doing great. We're only an hour in, which for us is great. I really like Lord Devling, though he's so awkward and I don't know. I love Penelope and Colin, but Lord Devling seems such a great man. I think it's really nice that they made that such a complicated choice, or that it felt like a choice that had weight and stakes, because Colin felt like that was the choice that Penelope wanted. Penelope felt like that was the choice she should want. And so it felt like a real obstacle and a real moment of change in terms of that relationship. I will be interested to see how Devling responds to this not engagement, because he seems like a good guy and there's no reason to anticipate him retaliating out of a hurt ego, but at the same time it's Bridgerton and maybe he'll retaliate out of a hurt ego. I don't know. So that is kind of where I am right now. But I really liked the idea that he could see Penelope, but at the same time, he obviously doesn't see her completely because he doesn't pick up on the realities of her window seat. I wouldn't mind more of Penelope telling off Portia, which I think we're going to get. I do love the nuances in the relationship with Portia that they've added in, because they've already deepened Portia as a character so much. And I loved the touches we got this season of still reinforcing the idea of Portia as a gossip. So we have her, kind of like loudly talking about this new inheritance order for the daughters early in the season. And when Violet says, oh, Lady Featherington has been talking about how they are anticipating a proposal. So we still have that, but she's got so much more depth to her. And she's still calculating in the book. She's calculating for Felicity, but yeah. Okay, yeah. Brooklyn Park says, wedding thoughts. Baby Race could hint at the Russian in the book. Yeah, like could facilitate the rush that we see from the book. Yeah. They were married when the public reveal happened in the books. They may do that. Episode 7 is joining of hands, wedding. I think so. Yeah, I think so. So I think 6 notoriously is usually a pretty divisive episode, or kind of like a cultural, emotional upheaval or reversal of some kind. It's not the full climax of the season because it's too early for that, but it's a very pivotal moment in the season. So I think we're going to see a lot there, but 7 also feels so late for them to be married. But, like a lot happens. Yeah, exactly. I also like Devling, but when he basically told Penelope he wouldn't have room in his heart to love her, I was like, really, dude? Colin, come and get your girl. Right. And so then like when he's like, I can't marry someone that could potentially have feelings elsewhere because I'm going to be gone a lot. It's like, well, what were you expecting when you're going to be married because you're going to be gone a lot? But also we know the reality is of like natural explorations at this time. So the odds of him not surviving an exploration are not non-existent. Welcome. We've been chatting for about an hour, but we're kind of going where the chat leads us. So glad to have you here and jump in however you feel so led. We move in circles sometimes because there's always more things to say. So don't worry about repeating something that may have been said earlier. That's a great question about chat parameters. I don't have a whole lot yet because I'm still very new to this. So if people have strong feelings, I know that I have been speaking a little cavalierly about book spoilers. So if people do feel strongly about not mentioning book spoilers, let me know. And of course, unfortunately, the spoilers so far or at any time are always beholden to my memory based on my latest reread, which isn't as strong as you would hope, considering how many times I've read some of these books. But we're also very firmly, we will be talking pretty specifically about the show in relation to Romancing Mr. Bridgerton for sure, but right. Yes. When Devlin said that, I was like, no, but remember, Penelope isn't looking for love. She's looking for someone that she can marry. She's given up on love. She just wants someone to take her away. Exactly, too. So she thinks that she can settle in this moment. And this goes back to in the book, if I can find where exactly it's sticky noted. I feel like there's a passage that talks about it more directly and more specifically, but she mentions early, like, is this still the prologue? Yes. It wouldn't be fair to marry someone when she was still so desperately in love with Colin. So this idea that she's so in love, but she has a moment where she contemplates if she even could marry someone else. Here's another passage I came across, which I think comes into play in part 2, but that I don't think I called out in any of our previous discussions, and I think is really important and very good. It says, or maybe that wasn't it at all. Maybe all this sadness, we've seen Penelope crying a lot. It's made me cry. Maybe all this sadness building up inside of her was for the death of a dream, her dream of him. She'd built up the perfect image of him in her mind, and with every word he spat in her face, it was becoming more and more obvious that her dream was quite simply wrong. So that is why, too, I think we haven't seen a lot of the real emotional depth that people are desiring from this first part, because we are still living in that dream. And I know this is just another way to say things we've already discussed, but does that make sense? Since I don't really know the context of the sentence, Sophie will introduce us to the downstairs. It's pretty hilarious. Okay, yeah, that is pretty funny and without context. That is absolutely true. Also, Francesca's, I'm totally not interested in him, mom. God, that I did really appreciate that. And it's like such an introvert thing to do. And I think Penelope is doing it in her own way too, right? Like, we all know how in love she is with Colin. Colin does not know that. And as much as it's obvious to us because we have been inside the story and inside of Penelope's head, as a wallflower or someone who identifies as a wallflower, not to get too personal about it, we're going to play those feelings when we don't think they're reciprocated very close to the chest, to the point where we hope no one ever knows the truth of our feelings there. And so that's where moments like that got really emotional for me personally. This idea of, especially with like the first kiss, knowing her speaking that was her giving up on that dream because she was asking for this. And we know that, like, we all know that that's what that moment was, but just with that extra emotional weight there. Yeah. Yeah, Catherine says, and he's going to Antarctica. That's not good, if I'm remembering the terror correctly. Listen, my book club reads a lot of boat books, and I have not read one boat book where a trip to Antarctica in this time frame goes well. Let me just put it that way. Yeah, Lord Doubling is a decent egg, but he's going to die in the Arctic, so... To be fair, like, again, that's not a spoiler because Devlin doesn't exist in the books. That's just speculation based on history. Oh, this is a really interesting perspective. Okay, thank you, Tally. Newbie here. I saw season 3 without watching the other seasons. I wish there were more episodes. I feel like more episodes could have fleshed out Polin. I wanted more lessons between them. That's a really interesting perspective, right? Because we're coming into this season, a lot of us, with this history between Colin and Penelope, and that impacts how much of them we are getting in this first 4-episode bunch, because their narrative has already started in whatever way. But it does harken back to how these stories exist in romance novels, where when we're switching the couples and when we have a fan favorite couple coming to the forefront, like I've mentioned before, sometimes we see those personalities shift a little bit, because now we're having to accommodate for that spotlight. Outside of Penelope and Colin, I think my biggest example of this that I can think of in this moment would be, is it West Ravenel from the Ravenel series by Lisa Kleypas, who I was like dying for his book for most of that series. And then we got to him and I was like, wait a minute, is this the same guy? And it's just having to look at those expectations. So I think that's a really interesting perspective, because I think there is an assumption that a lot of viewers are coming in with this prior knowledge, but based on the numbers, we know that that's not everyone, because I think it's the biggest premiere, though granted, people can have watched things since the other seasons premiered, so we can build up that audience. But I think that's a really, I want to say, interesting perspective again. I would love to hear other people's thoughts on that. Okay. Shazi says, the flirting scene between Devlin, Cressida, Penelope, I can't. I had to go back. It was hilarious. That's funny, because that's the scene that I want to die inside the most during. Like, if there were any scene that I'm going to skip in this first episode, 4-episode cluster, it's that one, because I just get secondhand embarrassment so much. And I think it's a well-crafted scene. I just get uncomfortable and I don't want to be there. I feel like I shouldn't be here. But yeah, like the grass, it's green. And then she has to go, like, I don't actually like grass. That does lead to a really nice moment where she does kind of own who she is, though. I think there is a lot of nuance and subtlety there in something that reads as such a broadly comic scene. And I mean broadly in like the terms of broad comedy, but yeah. Oh, that could be interesting. It would be interesting if they take the Gossip Girl route. Yeah, that could be, and give Lady Whistledown a new author. I know when the show first premiered, it was very popular to compare it to Gossip Girl, but just to be pretentious again for a second, both are pulling from, the history of gossip columns in society. Do not be sorry for missing a good chunk of the chat, because we're chatting casually and your time is valuable, and I'm just grateful you're here at all. But sorry, I missed a good chunk of the chat. But you prefer book Colin or show Colin? Sorry if somebody asked this already. I would love to hear people's thoughts. I don't have a preference at this point. I think that they both have insecurities that cause them to act in ways that make me want to slap them sometimes. But they are not here to win my affection. They're here to win Penelope's affection. And I think that they both have realistic character flaws. I think show Colin feels more updated in that exploration so far, but I think we're going to be moving into some of book Colin's insecurities coming to the forefront and coming out in the second part, because it aligns with those things coming out in the second part of the book. I think that makes sense. Yes. Not both versions of Colin are good. They even made a joke about him not eating all the food. Yeah, when he has that line about he can't come down or he'll eat all the biscuits. And I'll admit, I struggled, or have struggled in more like contemporary rereads, with the kind of framing of Colin always eating, or like always being hungry when he's visiting in the book. Because of course in the book we have the emphasis on weight loss with Penelope, which I don't want to spend too much time on, but we still see Penelope eating in the book, but I just struggle with the kind of framing of Penelope's glow up being dependent on her losing weight, and then focusing so much on how much Colin is eating. And that is probably just me growing up in diet culture and struggling. Yeah, she couldn't even look at him when she asked for the kiss. Yeah, that scene, oh, it I really like that scene. I think I also think the pacing of having those major emotional reversals at the end of season at the end of episode 2 and the end of episode 4, I think that's really smart. It obviously is propelling us into the big emotional moment in episode 6 that we can anticipate just from the historical pacing. Yes. Yeah, I'm still waiting for a scene with Colin actually pigging out on snacks. They talk big about how much he eats, but I'm looking and I'm never seeing it. In the same way that we like got teapot energy with the Anthony and Kate scene where he shoves all the papers off the desk, but we do not see him consuming an entire pot of tea very quickly so that he can ravish his wife, which is a great moment that we have been somewhat robbed of. Yeah, the lessons were short. But at the same time, Colin doesn't know what he's talking about. And I think that's the whole point. He's like presenting himself as this expert because he is using this charm to kind of fill whatever void, but he doesn't know anything. He doesn't know as much as he thinks he does. Oh, I love this perspective as well. I hadn't watched Bridgerton before a month ago. I just saw how cute Nicola was and learned a bit about the long time love story and had to watch the whole show. I love Nicola. I Yeah, yeah. And I love knowing that people are still discovering the show, still joining along for the ride. And again, I've mentioned this before too. This idea with romance novels and serial romance novels, where we're moving from couple to couple, the joy of being able to experience different flavors of love, different variations of a love story, recognize the kind of breadth of emotions there and how many different ways people can come together and how many things can keep people apart. And I just love that we don't have to choose. Like we can have stories that we gravitate to and they can change as we're in different seasons of life, what we gravitate to, but we can love all of them. We can, have preferences and where we don't love some, that's okay too. But I find a lot of joy in that. This is a good point. Like, as insecure as Colin is, and as much as he's fighting his own internal battles, the plot doesn't hinge on I, the man, have a bizarre trauma, which I'm not going to talk about, and I'm going to screw my relationship over. To be fair, that is a common theme in historical romance in terms of like raising the stakes. And part of it is allowing men the emotional vulnerability in these moments and recognizing the bravery of that emotional vulnerability. I think I've been whistling through my teeth sometimes. I think this is a good point too, Jessica. As much as I'm probably always on this channel going to frame my analysis through the books in some way because this is a bookish channel and whatnot, I think it is great to acknowledge that they are separate things. The stories require separate things, and there's been a lot of time between now and the novel when the novels came out, and romance had moved very quickly. And as you say, comparison to The Thief of Joy. So it's not going to be a beat for beat retelling. We've talked a lot in our previous discussions for people who have been here before about getting at the spirit of the thing rather than the exactitude of a thing in a retelling or and not retelling, an adaptation of this nature. but but best believe I'll be reading everything once the show ends. There are 8 children. And man, Gregory and Hyacinth were looking older this season, and I was like, what are they gonna do with those actors? Because, like, are they gonna switch out the actors? Because if we'll have watched them grow up on screen. I don't know. I'm not gonna think about that right now. We've got years to worry about that. But Colin is a chaos gremlin. I love him, but show Colin is now surprising me. Who is this unhinged boy aspiring to be wife guy? I feel like we need a TM after wife guy. But yeah, like he feels things so earnestly and so fully. And that's going to be the main or one of the main conflicts, as we discussed. As I mentioned in my analysis video, like showing that vulnerability, those tears, gorgeous. Him on his knees with those tears, gorgeous. But that vulnerability comes at a price. Like no one likes to feel like they've been made a fool of when they put their heart on the line in that way, or they feel like they've been emotionally vulnerable in that way, and then feel like they're being made a fool of because of the knowledge they have in that moment. So yeah. Is her losing weight a big thing in the book? Yes, in the sense that the book takes place like how long is the jump? It's almost a decade, I want to say. It's a pretty significant jump, which also brings into like another factor into the picture in that the book characters have lived more life period, right? So there is some distance there, even emotionally, in terms of navigating this relationship. And the immediacy, I think, works, the immediacy of No Time Jump, I think, works much more for something on the screen because the storytelling just operates differently. But yeah, it comes into play, and it talks about like how she lost a couple stones since her debut, and it wasn't as huge. Like it's not returned to again and again, I don't think, but it is mentioned, and I feel like it's even mentioned in Viscount that she's lost a little weight in between moments, and then again in that jump. Let's jump back. Also, in regards to Lady Whistledown's identity, it's hard to imagine taking her out as a plot device after a reveal, because without her, what does Charlotte do? We lose a source of conflict tension. I think that's a great observation. We would also lose Julie Andrews, which would be devastating to me personally. I mean, I'm but a simple girl. I love Julie Andrews. And I'm not a girl, I'm a woman, but you know what I mean. Ashley says, I convinced my mom to watch the show and she binged all the seasons, including the 4 episodes of season 3 in one weekend. She just has to watch Queen Charlotte yet. I was so happy. I was at her house when part 1 came out, and I basically told her, I don't care about our plans. I'm watching Bridgerton. You can watch it with me or not, but it's happening. I played in season 1, episode 1, and she was hooked. Yeah, I've actually been, this is the first season I have not been in my childhood home for. Season 1 was Christmas of 2020. And then season 2, I was home for my grandpa's funeral. And I watched the first episode, like waiting for my friend to come pick me up to take me to the train. So it's got me through some hard stuff. So I was very excited to be able to go into this season in a nice space. Although, side story that doesn't matter to the analysis, but it was like sometime in the week lead up to the drop, and my dad accidentally butt dialed me or pocket dialed me while I was at work. And so I saw that missed call and I freaked out because why else would he be calling me unless there was an emergency? And it was like right before Bridgerton. And I had this moment of like feeling panicked and also like, is Bridgerton going to become a harbinger of something catastrophic happening? It's not. We're good. We're golden. Yeah, Anthony, I'm going to switch back and forth between Anthony and Anthony, chugging an entire pot of tea, which honestly I picked up on this season. So did the characters, I think. Yeah, just so he can get with Kate. The waterbed sounds, yeah. I think I don't remember, did they finish that scene in the parlor? We literally just reread Viscount Who Loved Me, what, like 2 months ago? I'm a disgrace there. Never thought I would say this, but Colin needs impact in part 2. I prefer the show version, but the book gave Colin a distinct identity. I'm pleased overall with Foodie Colin. Yeah, and it's hard because Colin in the books too, like in the previous books, the way he operated was kind of like comedic relief in the ballroom. He served a function very similar to how we have seen Benedict historically, work in the ballroom. And so that was the kind of identity we were shifting into focus for his book in terms of his character changes. So we saw the kind of jokester before moving into this much more serious identity. And so here we're establishing in part one that he doesn't know who he is, which is hard in terms of storytelling and narratively, because then we are establishing that, but then we have a character that we don't know who they are in whatever way. So we have to kind of like balance that, let the viewers or us as an audience get just close enough that we feel like we can connect to them in some way, but still have that kind of reversal or revelation in part two, which I think is coming. Yeah, I think that that gets it at some of that for sure. I like that you bring up the height difference because I have in the past been a little bit of a not a hater, but like I have struggled with Allie Hazelwood, whose books I enjoy, like always emphasizing the height difference so specifically in her books and it like feeling like the same dynamic. And I recognize that that's a preference that some people have. Absolutely. But I got it. Like I didn't clock it as much. And then I saw these two against each other and I was like, oh, that's what people mean in regards to the height difference. Yeah. Ashley says season two made me realize just how much the show is very much inspired by, but not adhering to the books. This season actually feels the most like they tried to honor scenes and lines from the book. Yeah. I feel like season one did a pretty decent job, sometimes to its own detriment, although there were still major differences. Again, Daphne was not a diamond by any means, but I had a thought about this. Oh, I wanted to talk about the hand cut scene because I feel like they really framed that as people wanted this scene. And I get it. I get that it's an important scene from the book and that there are the first part of the book isn't particularly active and so there are these moments that really stand out. But like were they saying that because that's what they were giving us? Because I much more would have preferred to have like the eclair scene or something of that nature. What do we think? Do we were people clamoring for the hand cut scene? Yes, Jessica. Yes, White Guy did give me Ned Fulmer flashbacks. That's all I'm going to say about that. Do not speak Julie Andrews' age into existence. Thank you, Jessica. Yeah. She is 88 and still our queen. Absolutely. I love Julie Andrews so much. Oh yeah. Gregory and Hyson. And I love that they'll start, becoming more active. And I think we're even seeing them being more active this season. So generally, and this isn't book spoilers, but generally, in terms of romance structure, when you have a series like this, when you have someone whose book is going to be coming up, you start to see them kind of inch into the forefront of side plots or interacting with the main couple potentially in the book, which we're seeing in a different way in the show, but absolutely still there, especially in the introduction of Francesca this season, of which we know more than we've ever known about Francesca before her book in our lives. Like, it was a joke in season one that Francesca just wasn't there and how accurate to the book that was. And here we are. We've come so far, friends. Oh, this is a great question. I'm curious, who does everyone relate to the most? I relate to Penn the most personally, and I think that's why I have been obsessed with this season. Do you mean like in general, in terms of like all the characters, or in terms of like Penelope and Colin? Because I think they've done a really good job at making Colin more relatable as well in terms of his insecurities, or at least maybe I'm just grasping too firmly onto that people pleaser idea. But I think there is a lot to be said about how different Bridgerton siblings resonate so much with different people and how that is used to keep pushing the series forward. Because yes, like as you said, Bridgerton broke their own record for the first weekend's viewers, something like 45.1 million, which I didn't know if they could do, because like at a certain point, the growth stops, and it's not saying that something is wrong or bad. It's just like you cannot grow forever generally. So yeah, that was great to see, especially because I identify like I am emotionally imprinted on, or Penelope has emotionally imprinted on me. This is a good question too. Has the marketing always gone this hard as it did this year, or am I just trapped in the algorithm? I don't know. I feel like it did go very hard. It felt like we were waiting forever for that trailer or like a teaser back in like February or something. And then once it started, I was like, slow down. I did have to check out a little bit toward the end of the marketing push when they started releasing all of those videos talking directly to us as a viewer, because I don't like the fourth wall being broken in my face. But that is a personal preference. I thought it was a very smart marketing choice. I just decided not to engage. Okay, people were clamoring for the letter opener scene and travel journal writer Colin. Okay, so that, you know what? You're right, Christy. As usual, it relates back to him being a writer and that being the confirmation that he's a writer. Yes, Elise, I agree. And hello. I think they could have slipped a version of the eclair scene into the part where Penn is eating pastries and talking to Colin about Lord Debling. Yes, but I also think they were attempting to call back to the pastry scene with Penelope getting a brain freeze. It's just a split moment, but I think that they wanted the same kind of energy there. Someone pointed out that everyone looks so much taller this season, but then they realized it was because the camera was set to Pinn's height. That's a great observation as well. Like, whose perspective are we seeing things through based on the camera? And obviously, we have to frame Penelope in the scene, but as someone who technically has a minor in telecommunications, I often forget about the perspective and the point of view of the camera as a factor. Absolutely. This is a great observation. As someone who read the book a couple weeks ago, I cared less about keeping story beats. I'm actually surprised how crossed over it's been and keeping great lines. How did we feel about keeping the line? I guess they did add a Featherington. In the book, it's for God's sake, Penelope. He said, grabbing her hand and yanking her down. He does yank her a lot in the book. I am not upset to see that gone. Are you going to marry me or not? The minute that came out of his mouth, I did a little, I don't know if I screamed, but I was very happy. That's a good point. Marketing being different because of COVID restrictions. They're also probably attempting to beat their own record. There's a new showrunner, so, and a new format, so there's that dynamic. I have been surprised that they have not released the teaser that's at the end of part 2 on Netflix, or at the end of part 1 for part 2 on Netflix, that you all graciously clued me in existed, onto YouTube yet, just in terms of helping build that, but they also may be riding the wave of word of mouth still. And just like discussions like these are doing a lot of that work in terms of marketing and PR right now. But yes, they deserve a lot of awards for how well they navigated that and how well they balanced it, because they were also pushing a lot of collections, which I got a little burned out on, but I think it balanced with marketing and things that fans actually wanted to see on the feeds as well, and releasing the teaser clips and whatnot. Oh, Christy, bringing in a character from further down the line for those of us who haven't read the books. Um, Another people pleaser, and no one looks out for her. Yes, I'm excited to see all of our future love interests, because we have a lot that we have not met now, and we have the benefit again this season of having built up time with these two characters. I don't know if this is an answer, but Lady Featherington I find really relatable. Her and the Queen, like just over most of everyone, let's have goals and accomplish them. Yes, I love how they are developing these characters because, again, in the books and just the structure and nature of romance in general, everything is serving the romance, which again, we are still getting here, but we are really fleshing out these older women in particular in this world in a way that is great because, harkening back to the February discussion and just seeing that representation and how powerful that is. Just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in. Oh, okay. Little moments about the little cake scene in episode 3. That was my favorite line read of the season. Colin's soft good luck as he watches her leave. I was actually floored. Well done to Luke N on that one. I love Siren. The joys of living in a city. Yes, loving the proposal. Yes. Okay, I saw a comment that said the carriage scene was a masterclass in consent. I 100% agree. He didn't enter the carriage or make any moves without permission. I also want to take this moment to talk about intimacy coordination for just a little bit because I feel like that has been very much at the forefront of the conversation the last couple of years. Thank goodness. And I'm so excited to see intimacy coordination get the spotlight and get the recognition it deserves across many shows. I don't think you can do a show like Bridgerton without it. You could. It would not be a safe set for the actors. I came up in my training as intimacy coordination was becoming more practiced and accepted in rehearsal rooms in terms of having an intimacy coordinator on projects and just, the importance of protecting those moments because of how vulnerable they are. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the musical Spring Awakening. I worked on a production of that, and there is a scene there's an intimacy scene in that play that is very raw, and it can be played a couple different ways in terms of especially consent, depending on the actor and where the actor is taking that scene. I've seen it a couple ways. It depends how much your actor knows, or the character knows based on the actor's portrayal. It doesn't matter. Having those safe places for these actors to engage in that. And so I know there's been a lot of talk on the press tour about how central Luke and Nicola have been in these scenes, which I don't think should be minimized in any way. But I do think if I had heard anything but that they had been very central to these scenes, I would have been a little bit concerned. They are professionals. They are approaching these scenes from their character's perspective, and they know what they are comfortable with personally as well. So all of that is coming together, if that makes sense. And yes, when he pauses and looks at her, listen, the looks, not just the tears and like the vulnerability there, but the vulnerability of how much eye contact there is. I think we underestimate how intimate eye contact is, especially when we're looking at something like this in this relationship, because I think it's undeniably sexy in the moment, but also this idea of these two characters not being fully seen. So the intimacy and the connection and the love in being fully seen, and also the fear in that in some ways, because these characters don't trust that they are enough in and of themselves yet. That's their journey in a lot of ways. We talk about the hope. There's been a lot of talk about hope in the first half of the season in Lions. If we did like a textual analysis, we could. I don't want to go back to my days of Burkean analysis, and I'm not going to put you through explaining what that is. But in terms of like finding similar words and thematic clusters through the text, that aligns with what we see in the book as well in terms of that focus on hope. okay, let me look at this from Elise. People are saying they move too fast. I disagree. It is how friends to lovers works. There's so much already there: love, respect, caring, and once you express that, the floodgates open. Yes, and I think it's hard because I think people are coming in with different ideas or desires for how they want friends to lovers to work, because I've seen a lot of calls for flashbacks, which I'm not saying that those are bad desires in this moment, to be clear. But I personally, I don't know if that's how I see Colin and Penn's relationship. They have this intimacy. We know that they write to each other, they seek each other out at functions, but I don't know if they were ever like playing together as children. We do get the reference to their first meeting, which aligns pretty closely to the book. The difference being Colin talking about Penn kind of teasing him. And I didn't get that sense from Penn's recollection of that moment in the book. So that could just also be a difference of perspective, because in the show we're getting it from Colin's point of view, and in the book we get it from Penelope's. But she focuses in that moment in the book on how he was kind to her. And so, yeah, I had a thought that was going further, but yes, the close up on Penn's lip licking was a callback to Simon's season 1 spoon. Like, yes, yes. I think so. I think there's a lot of callbacks to season 1, which is also making me nervous. Again, because I think they're mirroring things a lot, which is smart, but scares me. Sorry, slowly never catching up. I just heard you make a Ravenel series reference, and Marrying Winterborn is one of my favorite books. Do you have a video on them? I have a video review of the last Ravenel book. I need to go back and revisit the Ravenels because, fun fact, okay, this is a Lisa Kleypas series, her most recent series. She hasn't announced a new series, and it's making me nervous. She's one of the giants of historical romance. Anyway, that was my first Lisa Kleypas series, believe it or not. And I started it when it first started. So when I started that series, I had not read the Wallflower series, which, if you like this book or this season of Bridgerton, you would love the Wallflower series. I will, after part 2, do a recommendation video of other Wallflower romances to read, mostly after part 2, because I'm reading and or rereading some books in preparation to be like as knowledgeable as possible for that. But there are a lot of references to Wallflower characters, or there are callbacks to some Wallflower characters in that series. Luckily, I had read the Wallflowers by the time the last book came out, because they do show up pretty intensely. So yes, Lisa Kleypas, sidebar. Yes, eye contact is so intimate, especially when it's prolonged. It really conveys so much, and you can't hide, right? Like, yeah, I think the eye contact was really well done. And so it's going to be interesting. And that, again, circles us back to the mirror, because we're going to force, presumably, well, in the book, we force Penelope to look at herself in a much different context. And we are just told what we would like that to turn into. But we're going to have to face ourselves. Or these characters are going to have to face themselves. Yes, eye contact is definitely important, especially for a wallflower or anyone introverted. Meeting and holding a gaze is such a vulnerable thing. I personally struggle with eye contact in real life, yes. And also, I think the wallflower piece, this idea that she's overlooked so much, she's used to being on the outskirts of things, used to not being seen, which is how she can be Lady Whistledown at all. And he is staring her down while doing some very intimate things, which I can only speak of euphemistically, surely. Actually, I don't know. It tells me it's mad at me for anything I've said. I'm still too new to live streams to know. Oh, yes, I love Matthew McFadden's Mr. Darcy. Very subtle and all in the eyes. I know that the Pride and Prejudice debates are contentious too, but I do love Matthew McFadden's Darcy. I also love Matthew McFadden in Anna Karenina with Keira Knightley, where they play a much different dynamic. Yeah, it's so intimate. And the moments in my life that have felt emotionally charged involved intense eye contact. Yeah, I really love the eye contact. Yeah, I do wish they had flashbacks of season similar to season one with respect to the history of Colin and Penn's friendship. Yeah, and we do get flashbacks in season two. So I think that that is narratively, um, there's narrative precedent for that that I can definitely see. And if we're circling back to this idea too, that even within the chat, we've got people who have just come in for this season. We don't do full like last time on Bridgerton, but we can still like you would in a book. You're not going to assume in series, generally you do some kind of narrative recap for those who may have forgotten from the last book, or generally people aren't picking up in the middle of like a regular book series. But like it helps get everyone on the same page narratively in terms of where we are in the emotional journeys or any journeys thereof. What do you mean the mirroring season one makes you nervous? Just the conflict that comes after marriage, really. And we know what's coming. Like we know there's going to be conflict there, but like the intensity of it and the strife and the distance, I'm not looking forward to it. I know it's going to be emotionally satisfying at the end. I know it's going to make that happily ever after so much better. It's going to make the big declaration of love so much better. I know I do find it interesting because people have talked about how we haven't had any of those like real memorable lines yet. And so things feel a little flat because of that. But we're not to the declaration of love yet. And I think we had a really I think it was a really challenging moment to like do the arc of the first part of the season and get it to an emotionally satisfying end and feel like we have moved somewhere narratively while recognizing that there's still so much yet to go. So we have this emotionally satisfying happy for now where we know the other shoe is about to drop. Is that the phrase? Go with it. But it still feels close enough, even though we know it's not true love yet. There's still that moment, those moments of intimacy and the seeing. Please feel free to give recommendations in the chat for other book series because we know I love book recommendations. Wallflower series is also Lisa Kleypas, who wrote Ravenels as well. So that's Kleypas. Yeah, the eye contact was so much hotter than if they'd just been kissing the whole time. And I think that's another challenge that I don't know that we have underplayed for like intimacy coordination or these scenes, like the choreographing of these scenes have to, like we talk about in romance, the intimacy, and people go to romance for all different reasons. I'm not begrudging anyone in how they approach reading romance or judging anyone for how they approach reading romance. I'm coming at this from my perspective. But for me, I respond best to those scenes when it's forwarding something. And it's usually about stripping down the emotions of the characters in some way. So the dynamics of those scenes directly play into the emotional beats or storyline or what have you of the characters. And so intimacy coordination is doing the same thing in the same way that any, kind of choreographing of a scene is forwarding the narrative as well as whatever. Like all of those scenes are serving a purpose. We might not like the purpose or agree with the purpose in some instances, but they have been included for a reason. All right, I want to know everyone's guess. What furniture did Nicola and Luke break? They said something you see more in the past. I have a guess. I want to know your guess now. Yes, Google is correct, Jessica. And you guys are all way ahead of me. Okay, this is an interesting observation too in terms of book versus show Colin. In seasons 1 and 2, I preferred book Colin. In this season, I prefer show Colin. Maybe Luke's portrayal is better than my mind. I also think it is seeing him come to the forefront. So like the book Colin in the ballroom is fun. Like book Colin in the early books is just fun. And so I think that makes sense. I understand that analysis. Yeah, I agree with the show don't tell. I do think that it is an instance of active dialogue though, because they have to the challenge I think with Colin and Penelope and their dialogue is like revealing things about character, deepening their relationship while still having this barrier in terms of both logistics and emotional. And so that is a way for them to connect in terms of sharing that moment together. Anytime they like have a moment where they get to laugh together this season, my heart just melts. And that's part of why like I'm looking forward to the conflict of season 2 in terms of them like just laying everything bare in those hopefully verbal sparring. But I do love the moments where they just are laughing together. And I think that there's intimacy in that as well. And I love acknowledging that, which I do think we acknowledge and see with Daphne and Simon as well. This idea that they are forming a friendship and in some ways too. So while it's interesting because fake dating and dating lessons are not the same trope, but they're in the same trope family, in the same way that wallflowers and blue stockings are not the same, but they often have overlap and can be the same. It makes sense, I promise. Her writing desk. Oh. Oh. I would love the symbolism of that. Okay, let's put a pin in that for part 2. We got another relate to Lady Featherington. I'm loving seeing the like diversity of who people relate to, and I love Lady Featherington this season. I think I even wrote a note about it. I don't know why I feel like I need to prove this to you, but I said, "Oh my god, I love Lady Featherington this season. So insightful." But I do. Desk, another desk vote, a chaise, which I can never say correctly. A settee, which apparently I also cannot say correctly. All great guesses. Oh, the wash basin stand. We're going to go through so much furniture in the sense that, like, so much furniture that I had forgotten existed. Like, maybe they accidentally knock it over. Okay. I like that idea. Okay. Another chaise. I'm going to stop trying to say that out loud to avoid embarrassment. Oh, that is good context clues and sleuthing. I love some sleuthing, Christy. Something made of wood is a good guess. Because it's not as sturdy. It looks sturdy, but is it? And as actors, they really should know. But they're just in the moment. I appreciate it. Yeah, Catherine, I think that plot-wise, that theory, and I'm not going to speak it just in case people, well, it's not really a spoiler because it's speculation, but I think that that's where it's leaning. Like, they're beating us so heavily over the head with the Philippa and Prudence procreating storyline that it feels like that's what they have to be setting up, or they're setting up making me a giant fool. Yes, Tally, this is a great point too. I love the carriage scene was spicy, but I loved how they laughed when they arrived at their destination. It made it genuine. Also nice to know that Luke and Nicola get along in real life. But yes, like that moment of just like the joy of it, and that felt intimate too. And this idea that like the different shades of intimacy, the different shades of love. It's not always the conflict. It's not always the angst, which are also very satisfying in their own moments and narrative arcs. But being able to see different tenors of that. The "why must I always be punished" was so good. Was so good. That whole conversation. I thought that that whole plot line was gonna wear on me, but I actually kind of loved it. Those actresses did a fantastic job of just their whole thing. Like, I really enjoyed it. Not sure I love not sure I love Lady Featherington, but I would die for Polly Walker. Yeah, she's knocking it out of the park. Like, and just the complexity that she is adding to Lady Featherington, the fact that, like, there are different, like, moments where I'm like, I really dislike this woman, and other moments where I see her so clearly, and I don't dislike her. It's I think that that was some excellent casting, and that casting obviously explains why we have deepened that character so significantly. Yeah, she didn't even give them the talk. She's, like, pressuring them about securing an heir, and they don't even know how to do it. And then they're laughed at for not knowing how to do it, which Daphne also didn't know how that was accomplished. So, yeah, the that moment being so full of love, and also, like, the way my heart was so full and sinking at the same time, seeing that moment be so full of love, because I'm just, the anxiety in me is just like the other, I know what's coming, and I just want to live suspended in this moment. And I think that's also too why they structured it this way, to give us these moments that kind of let us live and have that satisfaction before we get to that conflict. So again, I think those high emotional beats in episode 2 and episode 4 are really well done. Yeah, Penelope learned in the first season. But also it's interesting because a lot of historical romance, like, really pushes against the idea of, like, the unknowing, and maybe it's more just like, or the not knowing. Maybe it's more in modern historical romance too. Okay, Tally has a good one. Let's say you have the chance to direct an episode and you get to choose a guest star. Who would you pick slash cast, and what kind of role would he slash she be? An earl, a viscountess, etc. Because we have gotten, to my estimation, a lot more of the ton so far this season, in like seeing Penelope flirting with different gentlemen, and seeing Eloise interact with other ladies of society, in establishing the kind of boredom of society. I think we have to push past the bounds a little bit more to kind of see a little bit more of that picture. That's a good point too. Does Penelope know? Almarina said the baby came from love. She has a better idea, but is still very much in the dark. Yeah, we'll see. But yeah, but she's still finding out. Would like to see more working class people, which is why I love the Mondriches plotline, Will and Alice. I love them, especially because if you've been with me for a second, you know, in historical romance, I really gravitate toward a gaming hell for some reason. I'm not a gambler. I've never been in a casino in my life, but I love a gaming hell plotline. If you haven't read the Sarah MacLean, is it Rules of Love? That's not right. Series. Yeah. And I think we will get more of the working class as we move forward in the show. And I think we're getting a little bit more of it even this season, and seeing the maids of the Featherington household get to have a little bit more of, like, a reaction to things in regards to Penelope, especially. Jessica says, I thought Penn was playing dumb about how babies are made specifically because of Lady Whistledown wishing death and Simon's stamina during their honeymoon. Yeah, it's hard to know. And like having to remember that Lady Whistledown is not just a framing device in terms of the episodes and like a comedic voice, but also is Penelope, which can be hard to remember, especially when it is being spoken by Julie Andrews, which does bring us back to whether we will hear Penelope take on the voice of Lady Whistledown in part 2. I personally would really like to see it at least once, and I do think some of the marketing does lead me to believe that that could happen because we do see her speak, move into the Lady Whistledown speech in that series of marketing or PR or whatever they did on Instagram where characters are responding to Lady Whistledown. So I think that I still am really married to that idea for some reason, despite my aforementioned love of Julie Andrews. Are we still thinking on our desired guest appearances in Bridgerton? Because so far we haven't really had anyone that has upset the kind of suspension of disbelief of the world, in that there are names, but it's not like, at least for me as a viewer, jarred me out of things. Ashley says, I would love to see someone like James Marsden show up as an Earl or something, just come and liven things up a bit. He would be such a good addition too, as one of the kings of rom-coms. That's a good point. It's hard to delineate between Penelope and Whistledown's sensibilities, understanding, and emotions. She's so sweet, but simultaneously shrewd. Yeah. And getting to see that from Penelope. So we've seen like her being unsteady in this first half. So getting to see her be shrewd and a little bit more calculated in the second half. I'd love to see Henry Cavill in the show. I feel like that would throw me. Yeah, her being duplicitous isn't touched on very much. We're about to come to a lot of that reckoning. And Penelope is going to have to reckon with that a lot in herself as well. And again, she has the justification of her acting out of what she believed was the best course of action in the moment, as any good character believes when they take action, but that doesn't stop the impact of those actions. Which, yes, I just can't wait for Colin's reaction to Penelope being Lady Whistledown. I think that's where we're going to see the Colin anger coming out and appearing from the book, and I just hope that he doesn't yank her. McAvoy is a good one. That is a good one. Do you think we'll get the origin story of Lady Whistledown in this show? And yes, Catherine, we agree on the yanking or lack thereof. Yeah, that'll be interesting because we don't in the book either, since it's kind of a surprise for us as readers. It's like, oh, here we are. And in some ways, I was kind of shocked because it's going to feel narratively kind of similar in terms of we haven't really grappled with that quite as specifically in part 1. We definitely have touched on it. We know we saw Penelope writing what she wrote about Colin, and I do think it's important that she is always making those moves out of extreme emotion. So in similar ways to in the book, all of her kind of all of the writing as Lady Whistledown in the book that leads to whatever for her comes from extreme emotion, and we see that reflected in the first episode, but then we kind of let it lie for a bit. Yeah, they've added this layer to her where she's a sweet cinnamon roll, but she's also kind of an antagonist, except, yeah, it's interesting because like kind of battling out, although Lady Whistledown hasn't necessarily been malicious. Well, no, there have been moments. So it's hard. It's hard to balance. But I do like how we are making these characters a little bit more dynamic in that way. We're allowing them to have flaws and be loved in spite of those flaws or with those flaws. if that makes sense. Because there's no one that doesn't have flaws. Yes, I agree, Ashley. I do hope that Eloise hears Penn out fully at some point. She has been shutting her down and unwilling to hear, and I feel like Penn needs to just say it, physically say the words as to why she did it. I agree, and I think we're building to that. But I was really, really pleasantly surprised, as I mentioned before, I think, by how nuanced the relationship between Penelope and Eloise has been so far this season. I know it looks like, based on the preview, that Eloise is going to present Penelope with that ultimatum, surely based out of her love of her brother and not wanting that to go unsaid, but just that she doesn't truly want to hurt Penn. She doesn't want Penn to be alone. She just doesn't know how to be in that relationship anymore, that friendship anymore. And I think I really, really like what it's doing with that. Yeah, Eloise saw that anger in terms of the article, for sure. So there is that kind of recognition there. You are not late because you are here. Welcome. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Thanks for joining in, Jessica. It was great to have you on. I appreciate it. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate all of you being here. And you can be here for as little or as much time as you desire. Ashley says, Penn's downfall with Lady Whistledown in the book and the show is that she uses it to vent her personal frustrations, and that is such a dangerous game to play. Agreed. And that's what makes it interesting and dynamic. And once Penn being Lady Whistledown comes into play, because it's not in play in the books until like halfway through Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. So we don't really get to grapple with that as much. And yeah, I will always have feelings about that. I go through moments where I understand it more than others, but I do think it's really compelling that we're going to get to dig into that a little bit more and see the repercussions and the cost. We've already seen the cost of that more. Absolutely. An apology edible arrangement for Marina. Absolutely. Nicole Kidman in the back as an extra. Yes. And in Moulin Rouge ensemble. Thank you, Jessica. Yes. Like the video if you feel so inclined. If you feel so inclined. Those edible arrangements are so good. And I, in my, youth, did not appreciate how, like, we joke about sending an edible arrangement. And then as an adult, I'm like, edible arrangements are expensive. I get it. That is a gesture. Catherine's joke sequence here. Colin, I will hate Lady Whistledown and dance in her grave. And Eloise and Penelope nervously laughing. Yes, but yes, Lady Whistledown is her unhealthy coping mechanism, which is verbalized in the book, or verbalized isn't the word I want, but I think you're on the same train I am. In that, Lady Whistledown helps her find her voice, because in the beginning of the book, Penelope talks about, in the prologue, I believe, not being able to find her voice. And at this point in the book, we don't know about her being Lady Whistledown yet. I feel like this paragraph... Nope, that's not. That's a literal reference to finding her voice. But that is definitely something that's emphasized thematically in the book, is this idea of finding her voice. And we've seen that in part 1. And Colin has talked about how he knows Penn. And I find this could come into play too. They have written each other, and this could come into play. Now my brain is whirring. In terms of who said that he hopes, or they hope, Colin keeps Penn's letters. Because whatever that revelation is, he may balk at it at first, but they have been writing to each other for conceivably, potentially years. He has a backlog of writing. And Penn, in her youth and kind of emotion, probably isn't changing her tone and voice in her writing significantly. especially if it's that idea that Colin sees the real her. He's like, I know that you are charming and can have charming conversations because I know you and we've talked and I've written to you. So I'm this is a brain blast for me, Jimmy Neutron style. Yes, you can post a link from Nicola. Speaking of links from Nicola, I have a link in the description box to the Palestine charity or the charity for Palestinian relief that Nicola has linked on her Instagram. I personally made a donation on season 3 release day. You do whatever you so feel or however you feel so led, but just to know that that is linked there. Yes, I think this is an excellent point. I think sometimes cruelty can come from insecurity. So I think the meaner aspects of Lady Whistledown will somehow resolve as she comes to accept herself more fully through her character arc with Colin. Yes. I am nervous to look at how many times I'm just like, my hands are everywhere. I'm a hand talker. Good night, Disney Pirates. Excellent, excellent contributions as always. Thank you for being here. Ewan McGregor is a Viscount. Yes, he's coming back from Paris. We just have like a little side plot that's Ewan McGregor. Sadly, I don't think the timeline matches up there. But if it did, we could listen. Time is meaningless in this world, right? Like we could fudge the timeline to have just like Ewan McGregor in the background coming back from Paris post Moulin Rouge. Yeah, I really wanted to see Anthony and Kate get married too. And more importantly, I wanted to see him under that dang desk. I wanted to see him under that dang desk so bad. And like that sounds like a euphemism, and it's not. It's just a really sweet moment where Kate has a fear of thunderstorms and Anthony joins her under the desk and they just share this intimate moment. Yeah, that's the scene of this series so far I miss the most. Have any of us reassessed who we're expecting to be the lead for the next season? It feels like the chat is still leaning heavily toward Benedict, but some potential upset from Eloise. Do you mean the mantra, like the Will Alice plotline? I really do. I do think that's going to become relevant. Also, selfishly, I love Will and Alice because they provide one, they're gorgeous. They're gorgeous. But also they provide like some stability almost in terms of like a healthy married couple that are going through, like I said, their own kind of challenges, but they love each other and we get to see that. But I do think that is definitely going to come into play in the second half and or potentially being kind of threaded for future seasons. We'll see. Yeah, $60 to $70 a fruit basket. It's so let's just go to the grocery store and make our own fruit basket. Thank you so much for joining. Have a beautiful night and a wonderful weekend. You know what? That was phrased oddly, but the sentiments are meant well. Yes, Ashley, this is a good point. The hardest thing I am trying to place for down the road is eventually George III will pass, and so will Queen Charlotte. I don't know if they will ever bring that up because this is fantasy of that time. Yeah. And the fact that it's like the whole point is we're in the Regency era and we have not seen the Regent one time. In theory, we have seen him in Queen Charlotte, and not in theory. We have seen him in Queen Charlotte, but not in a way that like really stands out and not in a way wherein other Regency era historical fiction where the regent does appear, which notably he usually does not in romance. Like usually it's just the period. There's a lot that goes on in that and a lot of assumptions. Not assumptions, but you know what I mean. Yeah, historically, Queen Charlotte died. I don't even want to think about that, guys. The end of Queen Charlotte still makes me so sad. It's so well done, but it makes me so sad. We got to vote for Benedict. unless that's part of a joke thread I've missed. Yeah, how far are they gonna take that out of historical placement? Which, to be fair, they might. Catherine, that is your wheelhouse. You are the keeper of the cursed time, so you're gonna have to note that for us. Wish Julie Andrews would come to pen in a dream as Lady Whistledown. Now we're getting silly. And you know what? I don't mind it. Suggestion for links. Oh, you know what? I think based on if they keep, I'm not going to spoil anything in Francesca's book, but I think they may hold her for a bit. Like, I know that she's very prevalent this season, but I think they're gonna wait. I could be wrong. I may very well be wrong, but I think they're gonna wait. Keeper of the Cursed Time says they already killed off Princess Charlotte, so I think that playing Lady Whistledown is sometimes how Penelope vents her frustration. Agreed, absolutely. Because in some ways, I think it gives Colin less of a leg to stand on. He's read much of Pen's diary. Yeah, and the fact that she's read an intimate piece of writing from him, which isn't as much of a thing. Like in the book, he's very angry that she has presumably read his journal, his private writings. And in the show, he moves very quickly to, actually, I'll let you read more if you go talk to that guy over there. So that shows a level of trust in the show as well. And maybe it's that they've already been corresponding in a way that they weren't in the books. So there's already that level of familiarity in terms of the intimacy of seeing writing in that way. I think I'm also getting to the portion of the evening where I start talking very quickly, which I actively work very, very hard on this channel to curb that. So if I start just speaking too fast and or not enunciating at all, please let me know. Okay, we have a theory for a Benedict Eloise split because we're pushing the ensemble of the show to the point of supporting multiple main couples simultaneously. Potentially, I could see them doing that if they start getting nervous about support of the show flagging potentially, but I don't know. I'll be interested to see what they do. No matter where they go, someone isn't going to be happy, unfortunately, I think. So we'll see. Give us 10 episodes and I'd be okay with it. Same. Yes. Okay. This is great. I agree, Ashley. If we get any actual big time cameo, I want it to be Julie Andrews. Have her come in at least once and I will die happy. Yeah. Because most of us will recognize the cameo. And if it happens like in a big Lady Whistledown moment, which to be fair, I guess that would be part 2 if we were going to get it, similar to like a better version of Stephenie Meyer watching her characters get married in Twilight and me not laughing in the theater this time. Fun fact, I accidentally saw Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 2 in theaters opening weekend after not having seen any of the Twilight movies post New Moon. And I didn't realize it was opening weekend. And so it was just me and a friend up at the top. And people were getting very emotional about the wedding. And I begrudge no one who gets emotional about the wedding. But the minute it cut to Stephenie Meyer watching her own fictional characters get married, I could not. I was a slap-happy college student in the middle of a show season, and I lost it. Oh, TikTok might be hard. Yeah. I don't know how integrated they are, especially since I think TikTok and YouTube are feuding, or like YouTube views TikTok as like the enemy. So I don't know, but copy and paste I think would work for sure. And no apologies needed for the tangent, because you were indicating that it's related to an idea. And also, there are no rules that have been established for the chat. So that's something I'm excited to see payoff in part 2, Penn being allowed to read more of his journal. He said he would consider it. Yeah. And we do know that, like in the book, that's a major point of intimacy. And I would love to see that reflected in terms of the dynamics of that scene in the book where Colin is like reading over her shoulder and she's like, can you give me some space? And so he like goes, sits in the chair in the corner and is just staring at her and tapping his foot. And she's like, I need you to stop. I would like to see that. Julie Andrews comes in as Queen of Genovia. Yes. Is she the Dowager Queen of Genovia, technically, canonically, since we are going to get a third Princess Diaries movie? I don't know about the kids and their TikToks. I go back and forth on TikTok because I do have a friend that has TikTok that I like to support. But I got too addicted to it for a bit and had to stop. I had a thought. I don't know where it went. I'm impressed that you caught up and that you cared enough to catch up. So thank you. Elise says, I'd love to see an intimate scene in bed with them reading his journals together. Yeah, I think that'd be really nice. That'd be like a nice intimate moment. Because again, we talked about the intimacy of eye contact, but the intimacy of someone seeing this inner creative piece of you and the creative process. We've seen much less like guy in your MFA from Colin in the show, obviously, but there is that intimacy there as well. Back to Julie Andrews for a second. She'd be like the great-great-grandmother who Julie Andrews looks exactly like somehow, even though she married into the royal family. Yes. That's a side tangent, but I will be interested to see how the Princess Diaries lore continues since it deviates so much from the books. Yes, which does tie into the Genovian royal dynasty. If they could change something with Eloise's storyline, I feel like instead of her running away at their wedding, if we see it, she may meet Philip instead. I wonder if they'll do that in the next season. Yeah, I will be interested to see how they do that. Like if they keep the her being a writer plotline, because we don't have it so far. Like in the book, Colin is super proud of himself because he thinks he has figured out who Lady Whistledown is. But he's really worried because he thinks it's his sister Eloise because she always has ink-stained fingers. And so he's always telling Penelope, or he at least once tells Penelope, this theory he has. And at the time, I don't think we know Penelope is Lady Whistledown. So we don't get to experience the full dramatic irony of it in real time. We have to look back on it with dramatic irony. Follow up to that, if she's not the next lead, if they'll make Eloise write to Philip whilst not knowing it's him she's writing to and maybe having her see him as someone else differently if they bump into each other. Yeah, they're going to have to do something different in terms of throwing the two together because she starts writing to him because he's distantly connected. Is Marina the distant Bridgerton connection? I forget the family tree, but there's a relation there. With Marina being a relation of the Featheringtons, it changes the dynamic. Granted, it's been a while since I've revisited the Marina plotline just because it makes me sad. And yeah, and again, like, how old are the twins going to be? Are the twins going to factor in? So much, so much. Yeah, who does she think she's writing to? If we keep that, no, do not be sorry. I love that you have ideas long enough to share with me in that way. Absolutely. Yes. Okay. Eloise or Marina was a distant cousin. She hung out with Eloise as kids in the book. Yeah. Eloise still has a lot of fears of childbirth, which I think are valid, especially because we didn't really show her in relation, did we? I forget, in relation to Violet last season. I'm going to skip the major spoiler in the chat, sorry, but I see your theorizing. for sure. They're gonna have, yeah, we'll see. It's gonna hurt, that's for sure. I do like seeing, like, in terms of like Eloise being afraid of childbirth, I like seeing her worldview, like her worldview makes sense. It's a strong character trait, but I also love seeing that challenged in terms of, again, and I probably said this before, so just bear with me. Just her like recognizing, because she feels so strongly that others might see things differently, but also she does recognize that in some ways because she tells Colin that she's given up on that when he proudly brings her a feminist book, and she kind of like, he dims a little bit in that moment where she's like, "Oh, I'm reading Emma now," because his perfect gift has been spoiled, and that upsets how he views himself in the family and the dynamic, and he thinks that makes him less than somehow in that moment. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I also question now, they only made Anthony see their father die, if they'll make her as affected about that. And in the book, Anthony didn't see his father die. So they can all have feelings, I think, wrapped up in that, about that, while still wearing V's on everything. Because why not? I only now read Jane Austen. I do always forget that Jane Austen, like, because Jane Austen lives in like, I know intellectually that that's where we are, but I always have them in separate compartments in my head. And yes, I agree. She's like, that tells me so much about Eloise. If I didn't already know Eloise, I mean, I do, so I can say, of course, that makes sense. That's Eloise. So like, I think that her being Emma, like, or being attracted to Emma. Yeah, Catherine. Eloise is like in like early stages of understanding feminism. It's because she hasn't read the book Colin brought back for her. A great point too is that Jane Austen signing off as a lady, which I think is a nice parallel then to the secret identity of Lady Whistledown as well. And you know, we know the realities of, we've seen it with Jane Austen. We've all seen, hopefully, maybe Greta Gerwig's Little Women, only because I don't think the 90s Little Women had as much of a focus on that piece. I would have to revisit the Blu-ray that is sitting on my shelf. Yeah, what was the full title of the book Colin brought her? Also, like, I kind of laughed because when they're talking about in that scene, oh, you went to all of these cities in just a couple of months, and they're treating it as like this really impressive thing, like, oh, he's so worldly, and to me that reads as he didn't stay anywhere long enough to really truly get the sense of the place. So I think that there was a duality to that as well, and I think that there's a duality to so many of the little moments, and again, some of them may be intentional, some of them not, but that is part of analysis. Will Sophie's color be silver? We haven't seen her family yet, but color theory is so important to Bridgerton, and I'm on the lookout for any silver Benedict wears or is connected to. I think that's a good point too, and also goes back into this idea of analysis, because when I was in theater school, we had to do production analysis, and we had to look at make a case for what a particular production was saying or communicating or what have you. And we had to pick specific production elements, design choices that forwarded that thesis. And basically what I'm saying is fandom would be great at this because there's often a bad rap associated with reading too deeply into things, but so many of these things are very specific. They are choices. We can disagree potentially about whether they're successful choices. For instance, like Cressida's shoulders, which have gotten a lot of talk, had a lot of talk, you know what I mean, since this season came out. But it's so clearly a design choice. Those shoulders cannot be a design choice, or not be a design choice. So yes, I think that thinking about the color theory there is a piece. Oh, people thinking that Colin was lying about his traveling. That is a really interesting thought, because if you hadn't read the book, and granted, they could still do things differently than the book, but at the same time, he did travel in season 2, which we had already seen him established as a traveler as well. I'm going to zero in if there's a cover of Taylor Swift's Enchanted. As long as they don't put Long Live. I love Long Live, but I'm still really salty about Long Live at the end of the book. I always say it wrong. It's one of those things you've said it before you knew how to say it. The Buccaneers, I think, is how you actually say it. They used Nothing New so successfully early in that season, and then they ended with Long Live, and it just didn't make sense. Thank you so much for being here, Tally. And yes, the safe space is really important to me, and our chat is usually so good. I haven't had to make rules, but yes, I love that we can have, even when we have differing opinions, I want this to be a space where we're analyzing, we're looking at it, and people can react to things differently. Absolutely. So good night, and thank you for being here. I hope they do, Ashley. I hope they release the song titles for part 2 like they did for part 1. Yeah, it helped clue in to the emotional plotting of the next 4 episodes, because I did place where some of them are going to fall. Like, I placed Jealous, which I know I said I didn't like, that it didn't feel like it was as high of an emotional beat. But in my rewatch today, I feel like it was more specifically trying to clue us into that internal dialogue, where that was like one of Colin's moments of realization that he was experiencing jealousy. I agree. I think Enchanted would be used for Sophie and Benedict. That's where I would like to see it. Trying to think of what we've already used Taylor Swift this season. I don't know if they would license 2 Taylor Swift songs, but I'm trying to think of what would be at another emotional height, or what I'd place at another emotional height. Yeah, I think it's interesting how differently people see Colin versus Benedict. Colin is trying to figure out who he is, but Benedict is also quite literally in the middle. A lot of his scenes are with youthful Hyacinth and Gregory, or mature jaded Lady Tilly. Yeah, absolutely. And I think trying to distinguish the two, when a lot of their insecurities are going to be rooted from the same place in terms of what their purpose is, especially because we seem to be establishing, and the books do too, this idea that gentlemen don't work, which isn't across the board in historical romance, especially in like modern historical romance. Like, if you go into a Sarah MacLean, you're going to have someone running a gaming hell, or if you go into Elisa Kleypas, you're probably going to have like an industrialist. So I like this question. Does anyone have any song choices for part 2? I'm trying to figure out what they could be. Because I feel like they're saving some songs for part 2. And I love a good soundtrack. I want to know. Okay, there's a few possible musical spoilers for part 2 already. Don't know if you guys want to know. I'll let the chat decide, because right now I'm leaning toward yes. Yeah, they use Wildest Dreams in season 1, so I think that we get her songs each season if they want. Yeah, I just don't know if they do twice in a season. Lady Tilly to my analysis, this is not from the books. I mean, she could show up tangentially in some way, but she's not a direct, so far to my viewing, is not a direct transposing of anyone that we know of concretely yet. I know there has been some speculation about whether she will kind of mix in with Sophie's arc, but we'll see. Yeah, Benedict's arc is giving me the most, it's the most confusing to me right now. I can't figure it out. I know that there are pieces there, I just can't figure them out. So, and granted, like, maybe there aren't. There are things that we can have critiques of. I'm not saying there's always a reason, but I am always going to go looking for the reason, generally. So yeah, I wonder why they made Lady Tilly a plot. I feel like it's meant to make him tired of, like, Colin only having relations as a short term, and I'm not trying to be like immature about it, but as a short term distraction stuff. I feel like Benedict will be frustrated that Lady Tilly is an object, not something he's always been using as a connection, but it can become vapid. And once he also loses that passion for that, yeah, I'll be interested to see, because it's character development in some way. But in what way? And like, are we kind of like springboarding in the same way that Anthony's affair springboarded him? Well, it springboarded him to real connection, but he wasn't open to it at the beginning of the season at the same time. And I'm still shocked that they didn't bring that back when it did have a direct correlation that it could have been brought back from the books. Anyway, I had my own personal season 3 playlist, so all I can think of are the songs I picked, but they went so off course from what I'm thinking. I need to reevaluate. I do know what songs I want, a couple songs I want in Francesca's season. I do want Hosier's, which I'm sure I mispronounced Francesca, and I want Labyrinth by Taylor Swift. That's the Taylor Swift song I want in Francesca's book. I feel very strongly about it. Like, from the moment I listened to Midnights at midnight, I heard Labyrinth, and like, in the way that sometimes you just associate certain songs with certain books, in the same way that, like, when I was in high school, I was mentally making fan vids to The Way I Loved You The Way I Loved You fan vids to Outlander that didn't exist as a television show yet while driving. These are the tangents you get from me halfway into a Truly on a live at 10:30 Central. Ashley, I give you 2 gold stars for having Jealous on, because I'm still kicking myself that I did not. It, like, in retrospect, it was on the list and I was like, of course. But yes, it seems like the chat is okay with potential spoilers. Yes, I'm also here for anything Hosier. That's a great character analysis. Benedict uses sex as a rebellion to be out of the society, and I feel like she's going to be driving a lot more things. We'll see how that goes. Fair, Ashley. Listen, everyone is smart on the Jealous. You also get 2 gold stars. Oh, one of the songs is Mary. Listen, I actually really liked the Pitbull song in the carriage scene. Because I just, like, it's fun. It's got a good beat. It's a little sexy. And then I just love having the line, like, for all we know, we might not get tomorrow. I think that's the line, kind of hearkening back to episode 2 when Penelope says, I want you to kiss me because I might die tomorrow, just that idea that the ephemeral nature, while also knowing that we're going to have the emotional fallout of revelations. Like, I thought it was a really good choice. And I never would have thought of it because, it's not as current. Oh. Okay. I like the way you guys think. Why were none of these we didn't think of any of these, unless I'm forgetting, in the read along we did, where we were trying to guess some of the songs. Take Me to Church because of the church scene in the book. Yes. I really like the church scene in the book, and we're not going to get it, which stinks. But I can give that up because I've given up the desk scene. Yeah, agreed. The pacing, the beat, the arrangement, seeing Pitbull in a Regency outfit threw me, but I liked the buying in. I don't think I'd heard that song like that since Pitch Perfect. So, I mean, not like that, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Mirror is a great song about vulnerability and seeing through each other properly, realizing that they're the same and right for each other. So definitely perfect for Mirror scene. Yeah, I could see that working for sure. Especially because they're all arrangements. So too, it's like there's the subtext of like if you know the song, you can transpose that on top of it, but then also just the arrangements. My favorite music in the whole series has been the short, fluttery flute bit while Colin tried to confess to Penn unsuccessfully. Okay, speaking of music, since we're here, and I've gone hours at this point. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, friends. I'm not sorry, but we've been here for a while. Thank you. The more I sit with the possibility of a Smythe Smith quartet in the second half, the more I'm convincing myself it could happen, and I'm trying not to set myself up for failure. Yeah, I do know a lot of people want Yellow from Coldplay, but the emotional beats we are left with don't make it seem right anymore. I would agree. I also I love that song, but because it featured so prominently in the emotional height or like the big emotional climax of Crazy Rich Asians, I would think that they might be hesitant because they would want like their own standout moment, but I don't know. I don't know. At Last by Etta James, that would be good. Oh, they also get a new song, a new Tori Kelly song. Yeah, I don't think we'll get. We seem to we seem to potentially have given up on the dream of Yellow by Coldplay. Oh, I have not. I'm gonna have to go listen to this. Have we had have we had vocals? I feel like there was maybe a scene where there were vocals, but I don't remember if we've had. Okay. So some rumors floating around here or potential like actually what's in it. Especially because it is true, like there are people that have I don't know if they've seen all 8 at this point, but there are people that have seen at least through episode 6. So I like this one too, but it's a pivotal emotional height of the Twilight series, isn't it? Maybe that's just me being too like much like they need their own moment. I don't know. But yeah, there's still a piece of me. There's still a piece of me that's thinking we can get that quartet, especially because we haven't had. It seems like the wager from Lady Danbury is still coming, and we haven't had that kind of reversal. But at the same time, like it's not the right emotional beat from where it's at in the book. I don't know. A Demi Lovato song. I wonder which Demi Lovato song. Now I'm gonna like look at the Demi Lovato discography. Oh yeah, I would have loved the "We Can't Be Friends" by Ariana Grande in part one. I'm I heard when I heard it like when it came out, I was like, oh yeah, that would be perfect. But I feel like it probably was too new. Like they wouldn't have been aware of it for licensing, which stinks because it would have been so good. I'm sure there'll be a fan edit to it, or already is. Which back in my day we called fan vids. I have not seen all of them, but I'm pretty sure that was in one of the soundtracks. Don't quote me. But I did go through my Twilight phase in high school because I was right at that age. Oh, Confident. Oh, that would be so good. I have seen Demi Lovato in concert for free one time. Yeah. Too new to be in the show, but definitely on the playlist. Yeah, we can do whatever we want in our playlists. I'm trying to think. Actually, you know what? I have the read along up. Let me see if we have any songs. We did mention Flowers by Miley Cyrus. Is that you, Ashley? I know some people have different screen names. I do love Walk the Moon. The Heart One The Heart Once What It Wants. All great songs. I like listen, Harry Styles would be a great choice because it would sound great arranged. I think also like considering what would sound great or good arranged, although they can do a good arrangement of probably just about anything. Oh, there we go. If they'd done Taylor Swift twice, would have loved Daylight because Out of the Shadows into the Light. Yes. Yeah, Flowers as her walk into the ballroom. I liked A B C D E. I forget how far into the alphabet we go there. I liked it, but at the same time, like I don't know if that like the emotional beat could have hit really hard somewhere else as well. So I don't know. I didn't mind that song at all in context. I think was it Happier Than Ever? I think was probably one of my favorite arrangements other than the Pitbull of the season so far. Oh, golden hour during the Whistledown reveal. The paper's falling around everyone. I so hope we get that visual because I have been thinking about it for years now. It for a show that really pushes itself on the idea of the spectacle of these ballrooms and these parties and in a season where the whole point is that the ton is bored and it's just the same old. That would be a striking visual. Yeah, I agree. I feel like the worst one was the BTS one because it was rushed and shortened, so it didn't do anything. I agree. I have a friend. Well, I have multiple friends who are really big BTS fans. I have just been tangential to it, though I did go out and buy the new album before this live, the new RM Namjoon album. But I was really excited because I thought this was going to be the moment. Like I was like, BTS is in this season of Bridgerton, and then I had to like sadly text her, and be like, it's just a blip. Yes, when there was a moment in this season, Catherine, that made me think of you because you talked about that scene in the book where everyone was talking about how they didn't see Penelope. And there were moments that were like similar cuts in this season, I think, in terms of how people were talking to Penelope and about Penelope. Yeah, Dynamite felt a little like, there you go, we did it. Sticks out tongue made me so mad. Yeah, because like it could have been used so well, and it felt like it was trying to like they were throwing it in to bring the BTS to bring Army in, like, oh, we're using the song, but they didn't use the song. And I say that as someone again who's not like deep in the fandom, but like knows enough to. This is a good theory, or something to talk about here. I think Danbury might be the one that saves Penn and Whistledown along with Colin, of course, but I feel like they'll use her there to save them and have that connection with her there. Yes, because if we remember in the book, one, there is that friendship, which we had mentioned, but two, Penelope raises the idea of going to Lady Danbury and asking Lady Danbury to pretend to be Whistledown because Penelope has indicated in public circles that Lady Danbury might be Whistledown, like when asked directly who her theory is, but also because there's that friendship there, believing that she would help her. And then Colin says, hold off. And then he runs away to his family. And then everyone's sticking to Penelope like glue. Oh, I was thinking back earlier today, and I don't know if a single other man talks to Penelope the whole show besides Colin, maybe the fraud cousin. I think that is an excellent observation. So this is like the first time we're really seeing her interact with other gentlemen, or any gentleman, I guess, prior to 3. Yeah. Yeah, Ashley, I really want to see Danbury and Penelope interact in part, or wanted to see Danbury and Penelope interact in part 1 at least a little bit, and nothing. Yeah, we'll see if we get her in part 2. I feel like we're leaning so heavily on Lady Danbury being our connection to Queen Charlotte, and forwarding or using that friendship in whatever way. But it was a little sad to see her, you know, forwarding Francesca so much, though that may be just her doing a favor for Violet, and that friendship, and whatnot. But yeah, yes. The idea that they're alone together all the time, and like they make a point, or he makes a point when she comes over for lessons, that they needed a place to be alone, and we get the kind of reactions from the maid this season, but they had a lot of leeway so far. And there is something to be said for that, in that I think even in last season, even her mom writes her off so much that they don't even consider that improper. Like, that's not a compromise of her. It hasn't ruined her, because they don't even think that well of her. Yeah, but to be fair, like narratively, the narrative is interested in seeing her interact with Colin, but also she probably hasn't talked to other men, because she was put out by her mother before Eloise, so she was kind of out in society by herself for a year, and then her and Eloise were together. She's always been a wallflower. There's dynamics there, but yes, it's not great. She's never had her moment. The maid definitely knows their end game. The maid is us. She is our window, the fan voice by facial reaction in this show. Yeah, I agree, Elise. I love seeing her looks at Colin. Oh, I like this theory, because it's something I had not considered. It would be a beautiful full circle moment if Portia took the heat for Penelope as Lady Whistledown, which we. Oh, my camera is showing out of battery, which makes no sense because it's plugged in. But it's showing the little plugged in, so we might be okay. But we're on streaming, so I don't know what's going on there. Is my computer not? Technical stuff. If you notice something, let me know. And we shouldn't be on too much longer anyway, since it's probably late. I don't want to look at the clock. Yeah. The maid being like, if you do not marry her. And I loved seeing how protective, or not protective, but like how supportive her maid, and the housekeeper, the head of the household. There is a proper term for that, but I'm gonna blame it being late on me not thinking of it. Um, were of her, and like her new wardrobe. But I love that Portia was kind of dismissed it. She's like, she can wear sad colors if she wants, and like allowed her to have her dresses because she thought she was on the shelf. Varley, yes, true. She does bribe them. That is a factor.